Fire up all across the fruited plains of the internet. Then we're going to go ahead and get started. As we know, sometimes it takes a little while for YouTube to fire up and get moving, but it looks like we're there. So let's get started. Hello, my friends, and welcome back to yet another episode of Watching the Watchers Live. My name is Robert Gruler. I am a criminal defense attorney here at the R&R Law Group in the always beautiful and sunny Scottsdale, Arizona, where my team and I, over the course of many years, have represented thousands of good people facing criminal charges. And throughout our time in practice, we have seen a lot of problems with our justice system. I'm talking about misconduct involving the police. We have prosecutors behaving poorly. We have judges not particularly interested in a little thing called justice, and it all starts with the politicians, the people at the top, the ones who write the rules and pass the laws that they expect you and me to follow, but sometimes have a little bit of difficulty doing so themselves. That's why we started this show called Watching the Watchers, so that together with your help, we can shine that big, beautiful spotlight of accountability and transparency down upon our system with the hope of finding justice. And we're grateful that you are here and with us today because we've got a lot to get into. We're going to be talking about the Trump Organization and the CFO Allen Weisselberg. He's charged with 15 counts of fraud today out of New York. And we've been sort of monitoring this. This has been a slow boil. A lot of people on the left wing, on the leftist ideology here in this country, very excited about this today, and we're going to talk about it. So we're going to hear from Letitia James, the New York Attorney General. Remember her? She kind of ran for office on the back of prosecuting Donald Trump. So we're going to revisit some of those statements. And then Donald Trump and the Trump Organization, not Donald Trump himself, but the organization issued a statement in response, a formal response. So we're going to see what they have to say about it. And then, of course, Jonathan Turley is an estimable lawyer, somebody who has been around a little bit longer than I have been. So I want to make sure that we check in with him as well and see what his thoughts are on this. So we've got a lot to get to. Trump Organization, a little bit of activity going on there. So we're going to get into that and more. We've also got some stuff to talk about related to Nancy Pelosi, of course. January 6th, the Capitol Hill riots. We've been covering this for some time. A lot of people want a deep dive investigation. The Democrats really want it so that they can just sort of, continue to beat this thing into death already. But the Republicans have been sort of oppositional to this. Well, now today, Nancy Pelosi and the Democrats, they passed legislation that will ultimately create a select committee to investigate the Capitol Hill riot. So we got to talk about that. Representative Liz Cheney, who's a Republican, but a never-Trumper, a mega never-Trumper, is going to be on that committee, which of course is very convenient. Her interests are sort of aligned with Nancy Pelosi and maybe even Mitch McConnell. I don't know. As long as Donald Trump doesn't ever run again, I think that they're all sort of happy about that. We'll see whether or not that comes to fruition. So we've got to talk about that. And we'll probably continue to talk about that because the Democrats and nobody will ever let that go. Then we're going to wrap up with some heavy lifting from the Supreme Court. I know to leave that at the end of the show, but it's worth it because this is a good one. This is a 6-3 vote. This is a partisan vote. The conservatives went one way, the liberals went the other way, and it all involves voting rights, voting integrity, voter suppression if you're on one political side of the aisle. But the Supreme Court came out, major win for voter integrity throughout the country. And there's some pretty interesting things that we can dive into about that. So we've got a lot to get to. We're going to jump right into it. Want to invite you to be a part of the show. You can head on over to watchingthewatchers.locals.com, which is our sort of independent platform away from some of the big tech companies like YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, and the others, where we do other things. We just had a monthly meetup where we all got to connect with each other over Zoom and kind of learn a little bit about where people come from and what issues people are interested in. And so we're trying to do something a little bit more than maybe just do live streams here, trying to build a little bit of a community. And if you want to participate in that, it's available over at watchingthewatchers.locals.com. And you can also join in on the live chat that's happening right now. So if you want to ask a question, Miss Faith is back there. She'll be clipping some of those questions and adding them into the slides, and we'll be sure to get to those today. Also want to invite you to check out some of the other links down in the description below, specifically, of course, our law firm here at the R&R Law Group. We love helping good people facing criminal charges to find safety, clarity, and hope. We would love a referral from you. I also have some informational offerings down at gumroad.com/Robert Gruler, along with some other YouTube channels. And of course, while I'm asking, would love a subscribe and a thumbs up and a comment if you are here watching this currently. Okay, so enough of all of that. Let's get into the big news of the day. The Trump Organization and the CFO both charged with 15 counts of alleged fraud. That sounds pretty bad, but when you start to sort of decipher this, what is this really all about? It's kind of all about taxes and about like improper reporting of taxes, something that basically everybody in America does. And so we've been asking ourselves here, is this a legitimate prosecution, or is this a political prosecution? And based on sort of the other patterns that we've seen out of this administration, it certainly feels to me like this is absolutely a political prosecution. And so we're going to go through this and see what we can extract out of this. We're going to get some background over here from CBS News. They gave us an update today, this afternoon. They say that lawyers for the Trump Organization and its top executives, they pled not guilty to a slew of charges in Lower Manhattan courtroom on Thursday. So that was today. Prosecutors alleged that there was a 16-year scheme of fraud and tax evasion by Donald Trump and his company, not the president, but the former president, his company. So a grand jury came back, 15-count indictment. They've got Allen Weisselberg, the chief CFO, the late Wednesday evening. Prosecutors from the Manhattan Attorney's Office, they detailed the crimes in a 25-page indictment. We're going to take a look at some of that. The indictment alleged that the company and Weisselberg orchestrated a scheme to funnel more than $1.7 million in indirect employee compensation to the executive from 2005 to 2021. So 16 years of data they went back just to go and try to extract this charge. Okay. Prosecutors said the Trump Organization failed to properly report the payment to tax authorities, right? So it's a reporting violation. So you can, if you've ever sat down at a lunch or something like that and said, oh, hey, did we talk business? Yeah, we did. Oh, that's a business expense. And we're just going to write that off, right? How many business owners in America have ever done that? Every single one of them, right? We all joke about it. All those, maybe this is just lawyers that do this, but, oh yeah, we talk business. Oh, that's a write-off. And then write down, on the back of your receipt, had lunch with this person, right? This is, I've never done that, of course. So IRS, take it easy on us. But my point here is that, there's the tax code is a mess. And so what we're talking about is basically a reporting violation. So we'll see where this goes. Now, New York Attorney General Letitia James, we've talked a lot about Letitia James here, said that the indictment is an important marker in the ongoing criminal investigation. She also says the investigation will continue. We're going to follow the facts and the law wherever they may lead. So let's take a look at, remember Letitia James? Remember this gal? She actually ran for office promising to target the president and his family. So you see this Chiron down there at the bottom. Here she is getting sworn in. And this is from CNN back whenever she got sworn in. This was a while ago. But it says New York Attorney General vows to target the president and his family. So she actually got elected on this, on the basis of this. She's here from the New York Times or CBS News, whatever we just covered, out there sort of doing a victory celebration. She ran for office promising this. She vows she's being sworn in to target the president and his family. And it's not just the Chiron. Listen to this woman. Here she is.
Sworn in on Tuesday, do solemnly swear, has made clear that among her biggest targets will be
let's listen to that again.
Sworn in on Tuesday, do solemnly swear, has made clear that among her biggest targets will be President Trump and his business practices.
I will never be afraid to challenge this illegitimate president.
After all.
So remember that? That was the facial twitch, Letitia, illegitimate president. She's very upset about this so much that it actually contorts her face like the dark side kind of a thing. So she also, recall this, until they got to this moment today, they're very excited about it today. I've been getting a little bit vulgar on the show, kind of, using some, self gratification language, because that's what it has felt like for a long time. You've had Michael Cohen, you've had Stelter, you've had all of these people sort of in mainstream left side of the aisle going out there every day. Trump's going to get indicted. It's coming any day now. The clock is ticking, and just very excited about it. Sort of, very exciting themselves over this stuff. And here today, we sort of are at, this is it. It's a reporting charge, and you didn't even get Donald Trump himself. You just got the CFO and for non-reporting stuff. Let's see what's in here. And recall, this has been going on for some time. So they've been scrounging around in the gutter to try to find whatever they can for the Trump administration. They even went so far back in May to actually subpoena the guy's grandkids' schools. So New York prosecutors, they subpoenaed an elite private school that was attended by Allen Weisselberg's grandkids. Okay, that's how kind of insane these prosecutors are. They have such a derangement syndrome. They have such a sort of a frothing at the mouth that they can't help themselves but just go after their political enemies. She ran for office on that basis. CNN acknowledges it in their Chiron. We've got documented stories that are going after his grandkids at their private schools just to check the records. It's not political or anything like that. We just want to do our due diligence. We would certainly do this to anybody over at CNN or anybody over at Amazon or Facebook. Certainly, we would do a deep dive investigation if it were not our political enemies, but it just happens to be. It's a weird coincidence. Other than that, let's just let us do our jobs. Okay, we're good, wholesome prosecutors here. Now, of course, we know Donald Trump responded to this previously May 19th after they started to basically scour through the guy's grandkids' schools. He said that there's nothing here more corrupt than an investigation that is in desperate search of a crime, which is exactly what this is. It's a corrupt investigation that is in desperate search of a crime. So Trump nails it on that. Here are some pictures from the proceeding today. This is inside the court building. So, some are masked, some are not masked. This is Allen Weisselberg. And so you'll notice as we go through this, there's a lot of this building it's funny. If you spend time in courtrooms, they all sort of look the same to you. We have a courtroom here in Phoenix, the Central Court building that looks exactly like this. It's funny. They all sort of look the same. Here's them coming out of the courtroom. So Weisselberg is here. We got a whole entourage, right? Number of different guards. It's a big political prosecution. They just like to really milk this thing. And that's where we're at. Let's take a look at the indictment. Here, this is coming out. The people of the state of New York versus, let's take a look, against the Trump organization, the Trump Corporation doing business as the Trump Organization, the Trump Payroll Corp, the Trump Organization, and Allen Weisselberg. So you know who's not on that list? Donald Trump, right? The former president of the United States. So kind of anticlimactic. You expect after all that effort, all that work, just having a lot of real sort of vigor and energy in celebrating this investigation. Here we get, they don't even have Donald Trump. All right, well, that's kind of a letdown, isn't it? The grand jury of New York, by this indictment, accuses Trump and Allen Weisselberg of the crime of the scheme to defraud in the first degree. Oh my gosh, that's just horrendous. So the defendants now, they engaged in a scheme constituting a systematic, ongoing course of conduct with the intent to defraud more than one person and blah, 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 right? U.S. IRS, New York Department of Revenue, Finance, blah, blah, blah. The defendant is the Trump Organization. It's a trade name. There's a revocable trust. They're located on Fifth Avenue, New York. They call it Trump Tower. Trump Corporation serves as the employer of senior managers, including Allen Weisselberg. We've got corporation. Weisselberg works for them. These senior managers oversee many of the operating entities doing business as the Trump Organization. They're all based in Trump Tower. And if you've been following Trump for any length of time, you know that people in these positions, they have sort of hundreds of corporations, and so there's a lot to manage there. It sounds like Trump had that same sort of setup in order to defray liability and for some tax benefits. And the point of this is saying that there is a lot of moving parts here. Okay, I run a small business in Scottsdale, Arizona. We have about 24 employees, I think now, and it's a big job. Okay, it's a big job to we have a CFO, we have a bookkeeper. My business partner handles a lot of that. We have business coaches and a lot of eyeballs. We have a financial firm to sort of help with all of this stuff so that we don't run afoul of the rules. And we just have one company, right? Not hundreds of them, not billions of dollars in revenue. We're a small operation here, but there's a lot of compliance costs, right? This thing can easily get complicated. And I'm not saying that to make an excuse for Trump or his organization at all. I'm just sort of trying to provide some context. All of these corporations are being housed and held under one umbrella corporation taking place in the Trump Tower. So as the employer of Weisselberg and other managers, Trump Corporation was obligated to report taxes, of course. It was also required to withhold and pay taxes, all right? At all relevant times, the Trump Corporation delegated its obligation to other people, the Trump Payroll Corporation. So, when I'm not a corporate lawyer, but when you start layering on different layers, what you're trying to do is sort of create some room there so that if somebody tries to sue you, they sue one organization, and then that organization would absorb the liability and it wouldn't spread out into other potential corporations where maybe they would be able to access those bank accounts or recover under a lawsuit in that regard. So Trump Organization, we're not going to handle the payroll stuff. That's going to go over to the payroll company. Trump Payroll Corp then is now an organization also in the Trump Tower, also run by the staff. Trump also uses W-2 forms. They file income tax, all that stuff. Weisselberg, now we get to paragraph 3, is now and at all relevant times the CFO of the Trump Corporation. Weisselberg has worked for Trump since 1973, been its CFO, comptroller before that. At all times, he had the authority over accounting functions, including its payroll. So he supervised the comptroller of the Trump organization, managed day-to-day affairs and accounting, including payroll and other things. At all times, Weisselberg was authorized to act on behalf of Trump Corp and Trump Payroll Corp to formulate policy and to supervise subordinate employees, blah, blah, blah. As such, he served a high managerial agent of the Trump organization. So that's what they need to do, is they're sort of saying, oh, who's responsible for all of this? They're trying to connect it back up to Weisselberg. They say, look, he the comptroller reported to him. He had to deal with, payroll. He was sort of responsible for all of the employees in a managerial capacity, or at least it was delegated down to the comptroller, who would subsume most of those responsibilities. So now that they've sort of identified who they believe to be the culprit, the next question is, what was the scheme? What was the conduct that they think was inappropriate? So it says here now, beginning from at least 2005 to on or about June 30, 2021, 16 years, defendant and others operated a scheme for defrauding. The purpose was to compensate Weisselberg and other Trump executives in a manner that was, quote, off the books. Beneficiaries of the scheme received substantial portions of their income through indirect or disguised means and compensation that was unreported to the Trump Corp or payroll. The scheme was intended to allow certain employees to understate their compensation so that they could pay and did pay less taxes, right? So the idea here is you make $100,000 a year, right? And so you have to pay taxes on the income that you receive from the organization. So let's say Weisselberg receives $100,000 a year. Great. So he's being compensated appropriately. Maybe, they justify that some way. Don't think about the numbers. But if it's just $100,000, he gets $100,000. He's got to pay taxes on that. Fine. We all understand that. What if Donald Trump's organization said, well, we're just going to pay you $100,000 on paper, but you also get to, live in this house, and you also get to drive this car, and you also get to go on these vacations, and your grandkids get to go to this school and all of that stuff? Well, what then? Do you count those benefits as income? And if the answer is yes, they are income, then that has to be reportable. You got to pay taxes on those benefits you receive. So if the kid's tuition was 20 grand and that residence would have rented at, 100 grand a year and whatever, you add all those up, well, you got to pay taxes on those benefits. Here, what they're saying is that the CFO essentially wasn't doing that, was allowing this scheme to go on where people would go and they'd go on a vacation, but it was kind of, that benefit was more analogous to income than it is to some sort of a fringe benefit that people just get on the fringes, right? It's not something that the IRS considers to be actual income. It's just like, oh, you did a great job. Here are a couple tickets to the movies. You go to the movies. You don't report that as income. It's kind of a fringe benefit, right? And I don't know what the rule is on the movies, so don't quote me on that. But that's what they're saying is happening here. Okay, I'm not a tax lawyer. I took tax in law school, and it was a very, very interesting class, largely because it is so convoluted how messed up the tax code is. I mean, really, in my perspective, the tax code is even, I don't know if it's worse than the criminal code, but it's just as bad. I make this point here regularly that you can be convicted you can be charged with a crime for virtually anything, right? We make this point all the time. You drive to the office, you've committed like 3 crimes, you don't even know it. And I mean that seriously. People don't recognize how much activity is criminalized in this country. They just have no idea. Same thing with the tax code. It is it's actually, I would say, more complicated in many ways than the criminal code, because the criminal code is kind of straightforward, right? What is assault? Well, it's you made contact with somebody, it put them in apprehension of imminent physical injury, and there was a physical contact and there was harm, and we can kind of decipher that. With tax code, you're talking about all these deductions and above the line and below the line and all sorts of, very, very sort of abstract financial concepts that most Americans have no idea what the hell you're even talking about. So, the criminal code is complicated. And so now we're going to create another code that's sort of layered on top of that, that's even more complicated, that people are even less adept at understanding and deciphering just due to the nature of the subject matter. We're talking about a major ability for the government to go through it and find that you violated it for essentially whatever reason they want. When I was in law school, I bought the digital version of our tax book, and then I printed them out for some reason. I don't know why I did this, but I did this, and it was 2 binders about this big. All right. So the papers, of course, were thicker because I printed them. If they would have been a textbook, it probably would have been smaller. But that was just the textbook. Okay. That was not the criminal, or I'm sorry, the tax code. And it was also not the tax regulations, which is a whole separate thing. So it is so beyond convoluted. I can't even explain it. As somebody who's studied it in law, as somebody who has to pay a lot of them for all of our employees in our organization, and I know what a huge burden it is on us and others. So let's see what else is going on here. Let's see. It says further, the scheme involved the failure of the Trump organization to withhold income taxes. The scheme also allowed Trump and the organization to evade payment of payroll taxes that it was required to pay, right? So if these benefits are being handed out, if they're saying, go live in this house, go drive this car, well, Trump organization as the purveyor of that benefit, as the organization that is doling that out, they've got to be the ones who say, well, that is sort of income, and so we're going to categorize it as income and then tax it appropriately, or at least withhold the taxes so that we can pay them to the government. The government wants their money. 5 says one of the largest beneficiaries of the defendant's scheme was Weisselberg. So during the operation, defendants, so Trump organization, arranged for Weisselberg to receive indirect employee compensation in $1.76 million. How did he do it? Enabled him to receive compensation in ways that enabled the corporate defendants, so the Trump org, to report it, to avoid reporting it to the tax authorities, and that did not result in the withholding of income tax by the Trump organization. Weisselberg then concealed the compensation from his tax preparer and intentionally omitted it from his tax returns. Okay, so that is a troubling sentence right there. And I'm curious to see what evidence they've got. Okay, what does that intentionally mean, right? Do they have an email from Weisselberg saying, no, don't count that as compensation? You know, something like that. You know, Mr. Weisselberg, this is your CPA, this is your tax attorney. I need to know what you want me to do with this income. I think that this is a taxable benefit. I'm not going to be able to file this as a fringe benefit, and I need to know what you want me to do about this. And if Weisselberg responds back and says, "Oh no, file that as a fringe benefit. I don't want to pay income taxes on that." That's intentional, obviously, right? You don't even have to argue about that. But do they have that? Honestly, I don't know. They're saying they do. They're saying they've got some evidence that his tax preparer, that Weisselberg concealed it from the tax preparer and also intentionally omitted it from his tax returns. Okay, so we're gonna check in a little about preview of what's coming up, but we're gonna be checking in with Donald Rumsfeld. He just passed away, 88 years old, and he has an issue with taxes as well. So we're going to see what that looks like. But you know, we've got a lot of moving parts. I already explained that we've got a bookkeeper, a CPA, we've got all sorts of different financial advisors, and all sorts of different people. And the thing that's interesting about this is people have a lot of differing opinions on this. You know, you might talk to one CPA, he says, "No, that's questionable." You know, if you did it this way, then I would say that was this classification of a tax. And if you did it this way, well, I would say it's this classification. And you could take that same issue and go to another tax lawyer, and they would give you that same analysis, because the law literally is so convoluted, it's not even funny. Same thing with any lawyer, right? You can go to a criminal lawyer. It happens all the time at our firm. People call us and they say, "Hey, you know, I spoke to this other law firm and they said that I'm totally screwed. There's nothing that we can do. They've seen many of these cases. They know the prosecutor and the judge, and we're just out of luck." And we say, well, that's insane, because that's not accurate at all. We help people through these cases all the time, and they hire us and we get them a great outcome. And it's because there are differing opinions about different legal situations, right? In law school, we kind of joke about this. What is the only answer to any legal solution that ever has existed ever? If you're in law school, you know what it is. The answer is, it depends. It always depends. You can always make arguments both ways. And so, you know, the government, this is why we have these big, high standards, is this burden of proof that says the government has to prove it beyond a reasonable doubt. They've got to make that showing, right? It's like 80%, if you want to use that figure, more likely than not, is not good enough. It's got to be beyond a reasonable doubt. So they've got to prove that it was intentionally omitted from his tax returns. They've got to show that, you know, maybe there's no real justification for that. And I think the defense there is probably going to be pretty easy. We'll see. I'm not sure. Weisselberg concealed for years the fact that he was a resident of New York, was required to pay New York City income taxes. Okay, so like you can debate that, right? What is a resident of New York? How much time did he spend there? Did they really go through? Are they going to be able to make that case? Maybe he had a residence someplace else, a residence in a different state with lower taxes, right? A lot of people do that. They have a place in Florida. They travel back and forth between New York and Florida, go down there for the summer, back up to New York. So they're saying, well, you're a resident. And his attorneys are saying, no, I wasn't. So I'm not concealing anything because I wasn't actually a resident. During that period of time, this says, he evaded $556,000 of federal taxes, 106 in state taxes, adding up the numbers, saying he was not entitled to not keep those, to keep that money. Now, here is the Trump organization. So they're responding back. They're saying he's a loving and devoted husband, father and grandfather. Yeah, he sent his kids to a nice school, worked at the Trump organization for 48 years. He's now being used by the Manhattan District Attorney as a pawn in a scorched earth campaign, an attempt to harm the former president. The district attorney is bringing a criminal prosecution involving employee benefits that neither the IRS nor other district attorney would ever think of bringing. This is not justice. This is politics. And I actually couldn't agree more. It feels to me like this has been a long exercise in just a political prosecution. And finally, they're getting to this very, very unsatisfactory climax. But I hope they certainly enjoyed themselves. Now, as I mentioned earlier, Donald Rumsfeld. Why are we talking about Donald Rumsfeld here? Well, he just passed away. Doesn't really have much to do with Trump's taxes or the Trump organization or Allen Weisselberg. But I want to pause on here because he wrote a very, very interesting letter to the IRS in 2016 that I think it's worth mentioning here. So Donald Rumsfeld, as we know, he passed away. He was a former Secretary of Defense, died 88 years old. So they call him here over at CNN the acerbic architect of the Iraq War. A master Washington power player, was the Secretary of Defense for 2 presidents, died. Pugnacious businessman, bureaucrat, lawmaker, he helped drag victims out of the burning Pentagon on September 11th. The al-Qaeda attacks heralded the war on terror, and he directed and ultimately ended his political career when they went sour. Rumsfeld died surrounded by his family. No cause of death was provided. A longtime associate of Dick Cheney and George Bush, etc., served also for President Gerald Ford, right? So that's who he is. Now, I came across this very recently, and I just sort of laughed out loud. Okay, that's who that person was, right? Secretary of Defense, 2 presidents, somebody who was a businessman, bureaucrat, former lawmaker, dragged people out of the Pentagon, okay? Political career, served under President Bush, served under Gerald Ford, former associate of Vice President Dick Cheney, was in the cabinet during that administration. Somebody who's been around for a long time, okay? Extremely accomplished, call him smart or whatever. He doesn't really know what to do about taxes either. It's convoluted. He sends this letter back on April 15th, 2016. So he drafts this from Donald Rumsfeld. He sends this directly over to the IRS. Okay, 10th Street over in Washington, D.C. He says, look, dear sir or madam, once again, I have mailed in our federal income tax and gift tax filings for 2015, and I've requested an extension due to the delays in materials required to complete our tax return. He says, well, despite having performed this civic duty for over half a century, at the conclusion of filing this year's taxes, I remain mystified as to whether or not our tax returns and tax payment estimates are accurate. Doesn't even know. The possession of a college degree, retention of an experienced tax accounting firm, and the earnest application have failed to provide confidence that my returns and my payments are properly completed. It says, evidently, I am not alone in my concern. Millions of Americans find the U.S. tax code and the forms to be so complex that they will individually pay between several hundred to several $1,000s a year to hire a professional to help them file their taxes. A fundamental and annual civic duty should not be so laborious and costly for the average American. He says, I hope at some point in my lifetime, that I am now in my 80s, the U.S. government will radically simplify the tax code, possibly even institute a flat tax, so all those willing to pay what is required are able to do so with confidence that they have done so correctly. If you have questions, our tax accountant can be in touch with you to provide any additional information you may require. Sincerely, Donald Rumsfeld. I have no idea what the hell the IRS does, he says. I have no idea. What do you want me to do here? I filled it out. I've been doing it for 80 years. I would love to die knowing that this reprehensible code has been dealt with. Fortunately, that did not happen. Rumsfeld passed away. We still have the current tax code. Now, let's take a look at what Jonathan Turley has to say. Jonathan Turley, of course, very estimable lawyer, been around a little bit longer than I have, has a little bit more familiarity with some of the tax code, right? I know how criminal law works pretty well, I'd say, and not so much with the tax stuff, but other attorneys certainly have been around a while. I can always shoot from the hip. I took tax law. I don't like paying taxes. I know enough about it to deal with it. But let's see what Jonathan Turley has to say. So on Twitter, Jonathan Turley says, well, for a trophy prosecution, nailing a 73-year-old man for not reporting car and apartment benefits is not enough to mount, let alone brag about. right? So he's talking about Weisselberg. He says these cases tend to be easy to prove for failing to report income, but he says they are overwhelmingly addressed as civil matters, right? IRS comes through. They say, hey, you've got this delinquency. You have this offer and compromise, rectification. I actually did some tax law for about 9 months when I was an intern my second year in law school. So I know a little bit about it, but you have this offer and compromise. IRS says, hey, you owe us 500 grand. You say, well, I don't have it. And they say, well, what do you have? Let me look at your assets. Let's schedule this payment plan, and sort of you pay back your taxes. And you may even be able to compromise a much lower reduced payment, right? So rather than the 500,000, you reduce it down to, 250, you pay it over 5 years. IRS says, all right, that's good enough. Don't do it again. And you sort of work things out that way. That didn't happen here, obviously, right? Criminal charges, they're not pursuing this as a civil matter. Allegations like the payment of tuition are the strongest claims of taxable benefits, but it's not clear if his team has anything more meaty to charge, right? Anything else other than that? The charges against the Trump organization are exceptionally rare, he says, as the sole basis for a criminal case. It certainly seems more of a retaliation for failing to give incriminating material, as well as pressure to flip on Trump. Very good observation. However, not only is this a threat of a year in jail, it is extremely unlikely to result in jail time for a first offender, even if this bloated prosecution effort can secure this conviction in the first place, which I have some doubt about. The case seems more like a thrill kill prosecution in terms of its real size and significance. These cases tend to be easy to prove. We already read that. The issue for me comes down to these lines, right? Weisselberg then concealed the compensation for his tax preparer. The same line I mentioned previously. We already read that. It says this could be spinning the failure to disclose as concealment, right? Or something more intentional, which we don't know. That type of conduct obviously makes the violations more serious if proven in a criminal prosecution. So is it just a misclassification, or is it intentionally hiding the income? I don't know. We'll see how that works. Let's take a look at some questions over from watchingthewatchers.locals.com. First one in the house comes over from Thunder7. Hey, Thunder says, hey, Rob, love your show and learning about the basic legal details. Nobody is surprised at the Allen charge. The Dems have been searching for a crime for 4 years. There is nothing there, or they would have found it by now. Don't you think? Yeah, I do. I mean, they would have found it a long time ago if there was something there. Remember, they were grinding down Trump and the entire family all throughout 2019. And we know that even the Obama administration and all of the Michael Flynn and the Carter page and the two FBI lovers and all of that was going on. They have access to all of the inside information, right? Tucker Carlson is saying that they're creeping on him. Did they do the same thing to the Trump administration? There's a lot of evidence that says, yeah, they absolutely did. And so you would imagine that they would have been able to find something in there, right? It's like sort of like having access to somebody's closet, right? Or their locker, going in, let's see what you got in here. Let's see what creams you got and all this, these kind of, you have to use that. That's kind of weird. So, one of those things. The FBI gets to see it all. And they've got Biden in there now, and apparently they're looking at Tucker, and so I don't think there's anything there, but it's just political, of course. Savdi says, this may be similar to what Thunder 7 suggested. Do you think going after Allen is a result of not being able to find something on Trump himself? Yeah, so yes, right? So, I sort of explained this on yesterday's show, but there'll be situations where prosecutors will use one, and I didn't explain that in the Trump context, but there'll be situations where prosecutors will see the big prize, right? The big fish that they want to go latch onto. And so they got to work their way up there, right? And they got to go start at the bottom, find the receptionist. Okay, receptionist implicates the assistant implicates the manager implicates the executive assistant, who implicates the CFO, who implicates Trump, right? They're working their way up there. And every time they work their way up, they want to exert some leverage on that next tier. And so now they get to Allen Weisselberg. He's a CFO, right? He's certainly going to be the guy that's going to turn on Trump. They were supposed to get it from Michael Cohen, Trump's lawyer. Didn't have anything there either, right? Apparently that guy's like, singing like a bird. And so now they've got all his archives, anything that he had on Trump, and they still don't have anything. So now they're trying to get it from Weisselberg because Cohen failed. They couldn't get anything from Weisselberg. So they go, all right, jerk, you're not going to give us anything on the big guy? That's fine. We're going to prosecute you. 15 counts of whatever this is. And we're going to implicate the organization because it's a political prosecution. They are mad at him and they're going to make him pay the consequences for it. It's disgusting that this happens in our justice system. That is not justice. That is political attacks. It is political persecutions. Okay, this happens in insane other countries around the world. And it's now happening here because a lot of other things are happening here as well. We've got Want to Know says, what do you think about Kamala's bad work environment? No one likes her kind of like the witch in the Wizard of Oz. Not even the monkeys or the guards liked her. Treated like prisoners. Oh, no, I can't do Wizard of Oz analogies with Kamala Harris because that would probably make me a racist and a bigot and a woman hater or something. I don't know, all of the things. But it's a funny comment, Want to Know. I think that it is absolutely expected. I got a little bit of glee reading that because we all know it's true, right? She's kind of a miserable person just in general. She makes fun of prisoners. There was an interview where she was like, mocking them, saying, oh, like they're begging for food and water. And she put her hands out like this, like they're begging for water. Oh, please, sir. These are people incarcerated. She was the attorney general and a prosecutor over in California. So I don't think that she has much empathy and human compassion. And so it certainly shows in her office over in the vice president's wing of the White House. Sharon Quidney says, no doubt about it. This is a political persecution, a witch hunt. These people will never give up until they manage to concoct anything to get Trump and his organization supporters, thus giving meaning to new trumped up charges. Yeah, I like that. Why didn't I think of that? Trumped up charges. That's pretty good. I like that. Good to see you, Sharon. Want to Know says, aren't prosecutors supposed to review cases, not prosecute frivolous cases, dismiss unprosecutable cases? Is this against prosecutable law or ethics? Could Trump run a campaign and promise of having the FBI and the IRS investigate her? Great questions, Want to Know. Yeah, prosecutors are supposed to swear an oath and then follow that oath, right? To only do justice, to only prosecute where cases have probable cause, to not make things about politics or about personal vendettas. And this certainly doesn't resemble that to me, right? Jonathan Turley came out and he said, no, that's kind of out of the ordinary. I don't see people calling us all the time for tax reporting problems as a criminal violation because most of this stuff is handled civilly. And so, what can Trump do about it? If the problem here is that, it's sort of a double-edged, it's not the right way to say it. There's a Pandora's box that's going to be opened up a little bit here, which is very, very concerning to me. You start to have these political prosecutions take place. Guess what's going to happen next, right? The Republicans, when they're in charge and something like this happens, they're going to do the same thing. And I'm going to oppose that as well. It's not appropriate. Political prosecutions in criminal law is not appropriate. You're supposed to prosecute those cases in the court of public opinion. That's what elections are for. So it's not about sort of, I'm not opposed to rooting out corruption or investigating where it needs to be investigated, but this is not the crime of the century. This had nothing to do at all with anything that Trump did in office. This is a private business. They were doing the same thing that every other company does. They're not going after Amazon or Facebook or Twitter or any of the people that are friendly organizations. They're going after a political rival, and it's reprehensible. And if the Republicans do it, I'm going to condemn that as well. The criminal courts are not supposed to be used for that. It's a very sacred process. Okay, we're talking about taking people's lives and liberty away from them. It's a big deal. And so to just make this about making sure that your political enemy doesn't run again because you don't like his policy positions on whatever, immigration or something like that, is insane. This guy's life is going to be up in flames for the foreseeable future. He's facing, some serious consequences for something that is relatively minor in the grand scheme of things. Now, I'm Not Gas says, I exclusively follow John McAfee for tax advice. I'm not suicidal, FYI. That's good. I'm not either. I'm Not Gas. I'm definitely not. And apparently John McAfee wasn't either. Maybe. Who knows? All right. So that's a great comment. So obviously don't follow John McAfee for tax advice. Well, maybe you can, if you want to live that lifestyle. He lived a pretty interesting life. There are consequences, though, for following John McAfee's tax advice. John McAfee, man, what a story that was. We didn't really spend much time on that, but rest in peace there, John McAfee. John McAfee was a pretty memorable figure for me. I remember growing up talking about McAfee antivirus software. Maybe I did talk about this on the show. I was sort of like an antivirus sort of, we called them proggers, right, back in the AOL days, where you would sort of program these programs in Visual Basic, and you'd go into these chat rooms and you'd sort of create these chat bombs, and you could create these instant message bombs on AOL Instant Messenger. Remember AIM, any of you 90s kids? And you would go on there and you could create these programs that would send these instant message bombs across the internet, and it would actually log you off of AOL. Like if you got this, it would be like a strangely formatted text that would crash the AOL server or the software that was being run on your computer. And so people would send you text messages and it would log you off. And back in the 90s, that was a big deal. You had to like dial back in, you dial in on the phone and it would connect you. It would take like 5 minutes and then somebody would instant message bomb you and all that stuff. And anyway, so John McAfee at that time, it was the McAfee antivirus software, and they were sort of scanning for all of these progs and all these different things. And so I was very interested in that space. Sort of a cat and mouse game was going on online, and I was probably way too young to be in that space, but here we are, we made it. So John McAfee, rest in peace. What a great comment. All right, Speech Unleashed is here, says, did you know that the IRS cannot even be held liable for any errors in their tax instructions, which caused a person to pay the wrong amount in taxes? There have been several court cases where that has happened and the court has ruled in favor of the IRS. Yeah, so it doesn't surprise me at all. It sort of resembles a qualified immunity type of thing, right? The police, well, it's not their fault. They're the police. They're allowed to do those things. IRS, well, you kind of screwed up the errors in your tax instructions. Not our fault, right? We're the government. You can't sue us. What are you, nuts? All right. Soul Viking says, although Letitia, all right. There we go. All right. Although Letitia, with her endless budget and aspirations, will go hard, like you mentioned with the layers, once again, this will not touch Donald Trump. I totally agree. I don't think it's going to go anywhere against Donald Trump. They're all very excited about it. But as I said, very anticlimactic. We've got Jeremy says, if they find anything worth noting, he should thank them for finding discrepancies they were able to take care of. It's not like heaping hot coals on their head. Yeah, right. It's like, okay, we misclassified this. How much do we owe? $700,000. I think they said $500,000 here. Okay, here you go. Go away, right? That's how most of these things are dealt with. Not this one, though. Why? Because it's Trump, and it's the Trump organization. We've got Sharon Quidney says, the Dems are going right by the playbook of Lavrentiy Beria, which is Stalin's secret police henchman. I've never heard of that name. That's interesting. Who famously said, show me the man, and I'll show you the crime. Wow, that's amazing. I have not heard that. I've not even heard that name. I'm going to read about that later. Thank you, Sharon. Gosh, I love this show. It's amazing. We have Kenny 1B says, a jury will find him guilty just because he worked for the Trump organization. Yep. Unfortunately, beyond the reasonable doubt standard no longer applies if you're white male or a Trump employee. It's true, right? It's true. And this is what I've been saying about the weaponization of the justice system. The juror number 56, Brandon, what was his name? Brandon Mitchell, was that his name? I think it might have been that. But he sort of elbowed his way to get on that jury to effectuate a specific outcome. I think that is without any question, right? There are several images of him with the George Floyd, get your knee off of our neck shirt on, and he's at protests, on podcasts, doing those things. And he makes comments after the Chauvin verdict came out about African Americans needing to get onto juries. We need to get on there to effectuate social change. And you say, that's not justice at all. You can get a bunch of New Yorkers who become jurors and they want to incriminate Weisselberg. But guess what happens when we let this standard slide? When we say this line in the sand can be crossed, if we say that the Democrats can do this, they can go and make sure that they can weaponize political criminal trials. And so the Republicans are going to do that too. Folks, it may be a natural consequence. There may be nothing we can do to prevent that from happening. If one side exercises that weapon, the other side's going to respond in kind. Do you know who gets hurt? Everyday Americans, everyday people like you and me, those of us who just want to live our lives. Okay, these politicians are prosecuting the hell out of each other, having this political, high school drama with each other because they're incompetent, power-hungry egomaniacs. And what ends up happening is we start to see this over-criminalization that then trickles down to everybody else. And it hits people. If you start seeing weaponized jurors, listen, if you say that we have weaponized jurors and half the country are racist white males, how do you think a jury is going to respond if they feel that one particular ideology is punishing white people, like Derek Chauvin, for example, hypothetically, and we sort of reverse that, right? What if all these white racists that we keep hearing so much about get on juries and they start effectuating the other way? They just start incriminating African Americans or Hispanics, right? If this is really the premise that they're operating under, it's not okay. People on both sides, innocent people who should not be caught in the blast zone of this political prosecution, both directions, it's going to hurt real people. And, people like our company, our office, our team, we have to help deal with the catastrophe of this constant over-criminalization. People's lives are being ruined, and there's half of this country that's like, yeah, good, get him, Trump's the worst, man, get him out of there. You go, what? My friend, the next time this happens, this could be to you. This could be to somebody that you care about. It's a political prosecution based on policy, not based on actual criminality. And somebody's going to respond and say, well, it was criminal. Look at the code, look at the statute. Yes, I know, because everything is criminal, literally everything. As Sharon Quidney just said, La Vitri Beria, show me the man and I'll show you the crime. There it is, right? It's exactly right. It's a profound statement. Furby Slayers in the House says, Turley nails it. If this was a Dem, it would be a fine and a slap on the wrist. Several high-profile members of Congress had many recent tax issues they did not do too much about. The court should remove the AG from any involvement. No, yeah, they should. I mean, they should absolutely, based on that statement that she's running for office to go prosecute somebody, right? And that's, in my opinion, prosecutorial misconduct. It is a conflict of interest. Clearly, she's got a hard conflict there, and she's been involved in this and spearheading it. And, this is what they're going after, a $500,000 delinquent tax bill. They got Andrew Cuomo with like 10 legitimate complaints from women saying that he sexually assaulted them. And this attorney general and this whatever city prosecutor, they're both like, well, what are we going to do about that? But Donald Trump over there, man, he's right. They are picking and choosing based on their political ideology and political leanings, and it's reprehensible. I think they should all they should all pay the consequences at the ballot box. And this goes for Republicans too. Republicans who get in office and start trying to prosecute their political enemies are as reprehensible as the Democrats, and I will take that to the bank across the board. All right. D.K. Poor says, hey, Rob, do you think this will somehow backfire at the Dems now that this is getting obvious to the American people on both sides that the Dems are using their power against their opponents? I do think so. I think that we talk a lot about the pendulum swing in both directions, right? And there is going to be, I think, a response to this. I think the Democrats largely overplayed their hands, continuing to talk about January 6th like they almost seized America is now looking ridiculous, right? It looked ridiculous the entire time, but it's looking ridiculous. And we're starting to see sort of a crack in the facade, I think, just in general, sort of a general distrust in the government. I saw something, did we talk about this? I'm sort of mixing worlds. I might have posted this on Twitter. I can't recall. But there was a poll out from the Trafalgar Group, a good polling organization that came out and said recently that they were having conversations about whether Americans now think that they today have more freedom or less freedom than pre-COVID. And something like I posted this on Twitter, something like 57% of people say that they have less freedom. And I was like shocked, like only 57%. That's crazy, right? We absolutely have a lot less freedom monetarily. You've got, we went through a whole period where you actually couldn't leave your house, right? People couldn't go to churches. People can't say what they used to say anymore on the internet and things like that. So freedoms have certainly been diminished. And I think that when we juxtapose that with the other things that we see, like a lot of questions about Wuhan and about Biden's capacity, right? They told us that, oh, he's great. Look at him. He's riding a bike. He's got a lot of vigor over there. Okay. And we all are just sort of seeing it going, that's not right. Even Joe Rogan's out there. That we all know he's out of his mind. Okay. When you sort of lose people that are that mainstream, you're going to start to see some shifts in the general populace as well. You and I, all of us here on this channel, we've been seeing it for a long time. But now it's sort of trickling down into the masses. And I think that there will be a little bit of a shift the other direction, right? What we're seeing here is pretty plain and obvious. And I think that when more people wake up, we'll see the consequences of that. We've got Nadarb says, didn't the MOAG get punished for doing exactly what this NYAG is doing to Trump and the couple that held guns outside of the house? Yeah, so that was the McCloskeys. Missouri AG. What did the Missouri do? Yeah, I mean, there are, so I don't recall. So the other prosecutor, that was Kim Garner, right? Out of, was that Louisiana? The McCloskeys, where were they out of? Yeah, it was down there in the South. I can't recall where it was. But, some of the remediations are prosecutorial misconduct or malicious prosecution, sort of the same thing. But there's also some just general ethical violations that you could file against really any attorney if you wanted to go that route. So I'm not sure if there are going to be any consequences for any of them. But the Trump organization, now we know, of course, facing criminal charges. If you or somebody you know or love is also facing criminal charges, our law firm would love the opportunity to help. There's a lot that we can do. We help people with felonies, DUIs, drug charges, even traffic violations. We have a lot of criminal traffic laws here in Arizona. We have criminal speeding here. You can just be speeding. Boom, it's a crime. Class 3 misdemeanor, 30 days jail. It's kind of insane, but we have a lot of that here. So my point is, if you know anybody that needs some help, we've got a whole amazing team of people in Scottsdale. We would love the opportunity to help. 480-787-0394 for that. Now, if you don't need any actual legal representation, there may be some information that might be useful to you. I'd invite you to go check out my gumroad.com/Robert Gruler page and specifically take a look at this law enforcement interaction training. It's a 2.5-hour workshop. Just go take a look at it. There's a lot of information. Once you click this, it'll open it up and tell you all what's in there if you want to check that out. We had our Gruler Method legal mastermind today, talked to several other attorneys, including another YouTuber who you probably know about. And we'll see if we can maybe connect and do some work together. But that was a lot of fun. So I want to invite you to go check that out. Gumroad.com/Robert Gruler. And as always, thank you for all your support over at watchingthewatchers.locals.com. It really means the world to us that you are helping us to build a separate community, one brick at a time. All right, so we're going to change gears. We've got another segment we got to get to. Of course, we're talking about Nancy Pelosi, really excited about a January 6th committee, and she's going to do it, man. She did it today. In fact, we've got a committee that was just formed by Nancy Pelosi, and so this has been an ongoing issue. There's a lot that we can break down here. Let's get some background from Fox News. Marissa Schultz wrote this. She says, the House of Representatives, the U.S., passed legislation, which we're going to read, to commit a select committee focused only on one thing, that is, of course, the January 6th riot. This move was panned by the Republicans. The Republicans don't really want to go through this, but the vote passed in the House 220 to 190 with two Republicans, Liz Cheney and Adam Kinzinger, joining the Democrats to establish the committee. Okay, so it's a bipartisan committee now because Cheney and Kinzinger joined on it. Democrats had wanted to form an independent panel modeled after the 9/11 Commission, but that got thrown out. Without any way forward in the Senate to form this 9/11 style commission, she just did it on her own in the House of Representatives. So she established a select committee. We've talked about what a select committee is. Really can't do much of anything. Essentially, it's sort of like a subcommittee that asks questions. So we've checked in on a number of different subcommittees here on this show from both the House of Representatives and from the Senate. You know, they call people in, they say, hey, Mark Zuckerberg, is it true that you're censoring people? And he says, no, Senator, no. And they go, oh, great. Thanks for showing up here. Appreciate you being here today. Go back to your business. And they go on CNN. No, nothing's happening. So they're going to form another select committee. Now, normally these are subcommittees like appropriations or Homeland Security or Judiciary or whatever. So they have a separate select committee now only for the purpose of this investigation. It's not going to be permanent. It's going to spring up. They're going to investigate it, and then it's going to go away. All right. So they're charged with investigating the circumstances surrounding and you're going to see this in the actual document itself, surrounding the domestic terrorist attack. So it goes from like domestic violent extremism to like a riot, from a protest to something else. Now it's a domestic terrorist attack, according to Nancy Pelosi. So they're going to issue a final report with recommendations for corrective measures, whatever those may be. Of course, probably that Donald Trump be thrown out of the country. There's no timetable for the work to be completed, meaning that they could keep going well into the 2020 midterm election year. Isn't that convenient? Isn't that nice? So that means that in the news cycle from now, probably all the way up and through 2022, we're at least the elections. After the elections, depending on how those goes, probably don't really need to talk about them again unless and until 2024, when Trump runs again, then we're going to have to talk about it again. So maybe they'll just extend the committee all the way till 2024. Who knows? But they're going to just beat this thing. Oh my gosh, just beating it to death already. Says it will find the truth with which clearly Republicans fear, said Nancy Pelosi. So House GOP leader recommended a no vote, but passed anyways. The select committee is going to have a 13-member body. Pelosi's going to appoint 8 members, including a Democratic chairperson. An aide to Pelosi says she is seriously considering including a GOP member on her list of appointments. We'll see who maybe makes it on there. We have Cheney and Kinzinger would be under consideration, as they have been vocal critics of President Trump, and they backed his impeachment for incitement of insurrection, right? Remember that? So they're joining the Dems now. Great. Cheney said that she voted in favor of forming the committee because it's the only option remaining to thoroughly investigate the unprecedented assault on Congress. Already ousted from her GOP leadership position, she said that the threat to our republic has not been lost yet. So here is what she posted on Twitter. Says, I've said before, this is Liz Cheney, I've said before that a bipartisan independent commission would have been the best way to investigate the attack. The effort was unfortunately blocked. Select committee is now the only remaining option. I will vote to support it. See my full statement. She says, the attack on January 6th was an unprecedented assault on Congress, okay, and the functioning of our democratic process that day. That day, almost all of us recognize what happened. The courage of my party's leaders has faded, she says. The threat to our republic has not. On a daily basis, Donald Trump repeats the same statements that provokes the violence that he provoked before. His attacks on our Constitution are accelerating. Our responsibility is to confront these threats. Okay, so earlier this month, along with 34 other Republicans, I supported the creation of a bipartisan agreement. I've said before, this is the best way to address the assault. It is right to be wary of an overtly partisan inquiry, but Congress is obligated to conduct a full investigation of the most serious attack on our Capitol since 1814. We deserve brave law enforcement officers. I will vote to support it. Let's see. She says she wants it to be sober, professional, and nonpartisan. Says the threat to our democracy is far too grave for grandstanding or political maneuvering. Oh my God, these people, they can't even recognize their own hypocrisy right in their own statements. She says the threat to our democracy is far too grave for what? Grandstanding and political maneuvering. And then supports the creation of a grandstanding and politically maneuverable entity. Okay, so that's great. Committee should issue and enforce subpoenas promptly. Hired counsel and do its job thoroughly and expeditiously. The American people need to deserve a full accounting. We must ensure this never happens again. Well, maybe they want to start with asking the FBI and some of the intelligence officials why they allowed all of this to happen in the first place. If we've got 18 intelligence communities and they're all supposed to be very intelligent, well, they sort of dropped the ball on this one, didn't they? So let's finish the article over from Fox News before we get some updates on who is going to be joining the committee. So House Minority Leader, we all know Kevin McCarthy, says that he's going to have to be consulted. They're saying 140 police officers were injured. 2 officers died by suicide in the days that follow. And a third, Brian Sicknick, collapsed and later died after engaging with the protesters. By natural causes. They don't add that in there. Medical exam. Oh, there it is. Natural causes. So Pelosi invited members of D.C. and U.S. Capitol Police to attend Wednesday's votes. Rep. Mo Brooks was there. I think Leader McCarthy should have their own select committee that does an investigation, says Mo Brooks. If you're going to form a committee, we're going to form our own stinking committee, and we're going to investigate your committee. What do you think about that there, Nancy? The January 6th committee will have subpoena power, and it's basically going to do a bunch more of nothing. Okay, we have already gone through this, my friends. We already went through the impeachment. We just did this. And they failed miserably. It was a joke. It was an embarrassment. So that didn't happen. So they're going to keep, okay, well, we can't actually impeach the Trump, so we're just going to, complain about him for the next 2 years. Live updates. So Pelosi then named Cheney. So Cheney was now being kicked around, and boom, there she is, named on the committee, of course, which is where she wants to be, because Kevin McCarthy said you're not in leadership anymore. So she says, okay, that's fine. I'm going to go and just be over here on this committee, and I'm just going to continue to be a thorn in your side for the foreseeable future. So good for her for playing her cards. Speaker Pelosi chose Liz Cheney, a Wyoming Republican who's a prominent critic of the president, former President Trump, for one of her 8 spots on the committee. Republicans have not announced their pick, so that's going to be fun to see what Cheney has to say. So the House passed some other stuff that's not relevant to that. Speaker Nancy Pelosi named Liz Cheney, Republican of Wyoming, and a harsh critic of former President Trump, to a newly created council. Cheney was ousted from Republican leadership for speaking out about Trump. Her appointment to the committee appeared to be an attempt by Democrats to bring a degree of bipartisanship. Yeah, right. Cheney said in a statement she was honored to serve and wants to stay above partisan politics. McCarthy said that Cheney's decision to accept the post was shocking, suggesting that he would strip her of all other committee assignments as punishment. I don't know in history where someone would get their committee assignments from the speaker and then expect to get them from the conference as well, he said. It would be the second time in as many months as McCarthy penalized Cheney, but she doesn't. Cheney's going to go over to the Democrats at some point, if I had to say so. Or she's just going to sort of embrace this mantle as like the new John McCain. Okay. But that's Kirsten Sinema, so I'm not sure who she's going to be. I don't know. We'll have to see. On Thursday, Pelosi also announced Representative Benny Thompson, a Democrat, is going to be on it. Going to have to get to the bottom of finding out these things that went on, he said. So we'll see. All right, we'll see. Let's take a look at what the resolution actually says here. Very dramatic, as is usually the case with these things. She says this is HR, whatever it ends up being. This is establishing a select committee to investigate the January 6th attack on the U.S. Capitol. So they are going to give us some background, right? When we see these resolutions, they lay out some framework for us. They say, okay, well, this happened, and then this happened, and this happened, and then this happened, and therefore this happened, which means we have to respond and do this. So they lay out sort of a causal link, the chain link of all the different things that are going on. And here she says, on January 6th, one of the darkest days in our democracy, during which insurrectionists attempted to impede Congress's constitutional mandate to validate the election, blah, blah, blah. Physical harm, 140 members of law enforcement, etc. Then on January 27th, Department of Homeland Security issued a terrorism advisory bulletin due to a heightened threat environment. Okay, January 27th, of course, Biden's in office at that point in time. Says some ideologically motivated violent extremists with objections to the exercise of government authority could incite and commit violence. So Department of Homeland Security then comes out as soon as Biden takes office and starts throwing their weight around, says that DHS is concerned that the same people who attacked the Capitol might target other government officials again. Threats of violence against critical infrastructure are very, very scary for us, including violent extremists and conspiracy theories. And they're angry about COVID-19. These people are scaring us. So on September 24th, then, 2020, FBI director said that the underlying drivers for domestic violent extremism are things like, perceptions of government or law enforcement overreach. Okay, so like people like me, right, who say that they don't like it when the government oversteps their bound. When my perception of the government is that it is useless and garbage in most situations, apparently, am I driving this stuff? Are you serious? Am I driving that? Socio-political conditions, apparently, racism, anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, misogyny, reactions to legislative actions all remain constant. So basically, anytime that you want to participate in American ideals, if you want to have a conversation about, any socio-political conditions, or if you have a reaction to legislative actions, well, now you are somebody who is contributing literally to the underlying drivers for domestic violent extremism. That's in this paragraph, right? Underlying drivers, reactions to legislative actions. Okay. He says that they all remain constant. Within that bucket, category, we have the racially motivated violent extremists. He says, I think this is the biggest bucket in the larger group. So now they go after the white supremacist and so on, right? Racially motivated violent extremist bucket, big bucket. Goes on. This says on April 15th, Michael Bolton came out, 2021. He said some stuff. U.S. Capitol Police did not have any policies or procedures in place. Then the U.S. Capitol Police failed to disseminate information from the outside sources, blah, blah, blah. So therefore, then, we testify that this whole thing needs to be established and resolved. Therefore, it is. Section 1, we establish the committee. Section 2, we appoint some members. We designate a chair. We fill any vacancies. What's the purpose of this? Why are we creating this in the first place? Number 1, to investigate and report upon the facts, circumstances, and causes relating to the domestic terrorist attack upon the U.S. Capitol, hereinafter referred to as the domestic terrorist attack on the Capitol. This is now being called a domestic terrorist attack on the Capitol. So do whatever you want with that. I mean, we know what happened the last time they started to go after terrorists out there. Okay, Americans lost civil liberties hand over fist, just sort of evaporated right in front of our eyes. Actually, we didn't even know about it. They didn't tell us about it until Edward Snowden revealed it in front of our very eyes. So now what they're doing is they're just sort of taking this thing that would easily fit in a criminal bucket. Okay, you could easily say every single one of those people was trespassing. They were interfering with lawful government operations. They were, making unlawful threats and doing things that were intimidating people, which are all crimes. And now we're not going to put them in that bucket. We're going to put them in the terrorist bucket. Why is that? Why do you think that is? It might be because they want to use the same tools that they use for the foreign terrorists here for domestic terrorists. Think that may be where this is going? Maybe, I don't know. And relating to the interference with the peaceful transfer of power, including facts and causes. They want to think, what are the facts and causes? What are all the instrumentalities here? The purpose of this is to examine and evaluate evidence that was developed surrounding the domestic terrorist attack, to build upon the investigations of others, to make sure that we're not duplicating efforts or any of these other things, because we really want to make sure that this is a nonpartisan commission as we investigate the domestic terrorist attack on the Capitol. There it is again. What other functions do we have? Well, we want to investigate the facts. Of course, investigation's good. We want to investigate all the causes relating to the domestic terrorist attack on the Capitol. Also, activities of intelligence agencies, armed services, influencing factors. What else contributed to this terrorist attack? Other entities of the public. They want to identify, review, and evaluate the causes, the command and control of the Capitol Police, the National Guard, Metro Police, federal, state, blah, 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 the structure, policies, protocols of all of the things. What are they going to report? What are they going to create? A report. They're going to have interim reports. So every so often, we should be expecting them to give us the results of its investigations. We'll see if we ever get those. Treatment of classified or law enforcement sensitive matter. What are they going to do with this stuff? Well, it may be issued in unclassified forms, but not if it's classified. Corrective measures. So they want to prevent future acts of violence. Of course, they want to prevent domestic terrorism again. Got to make sure they do that. They want to improve the security posture of the U.S. Capitol complex. The procedure. This is how you get access to classified information. We've got these different rules. So all this is pretty boring. Select committee, it's going to go and, rule 11. Select committee rule 11 over here, parts 3 and 4. Don't need to get into that. Records, sharing of records, and funding, and all of that other stuff. So at the end, the termination, the select committee shall terminate 30 days after filing the final report under Section 4, which of course is over here. The final report is going to be, summarizing all of those different functions there. So records are going to be the records of the committee, and copies are going to be provided to everybody else. So we'll see. Look, I honestly would like to know what the truth is here. If I had to suspect, I would guess that there were probably a ton of intelligence officials that sort of had a pretty strong hint that something like this might be going on, right? We had the FBI that was embedded with the Governor Whitmer kidnappers for a long period of time, right? And apparently they were some sort of loosely organized militia. The FBI had several informants there. You're telling me that they didn't have any of that going on in any of those organizations that were taking place in front of the Capitol that day? They didn't know? There were several different sort of what felt like stand-down orders. We've read them here. We read Mayor Muriel Bowser over there from Washington, D.C., who sent a letter the day before January 6th saying, we don't need the National Guard. We don't want them here. Don't bring them here. I would like to know what prompted all of that. And if there were stand-down orders, where'd they come from? Because a lot of people had a lot to gain by allowing this to happen. And I'm curious I'd like to know more about that. We have some questions coming in hot from over at watchingthewatchers.locals.com. First up is ZZ the Boxing Cat says, who knows? Maybe we will find out who murdered Ashley Babbitt. Good question. Yeah, I wonder who did, right? We don't really know what happened there. And nobody ever really talks about that, right? There's a lot of people who are dead. 2 officers by suicide, Sicknick by natural causes, but Ashley Babbitt kind of just gets forgotten about. Do you think they're going to investigate that? Probably not. All right, we've got John Delar, 52, says, why don't they create a committee about the 3 months of rioting done by the Democrats? They actually caused billions of dollars in damage and attack people because it's the wrong political party. That's the only reason, right? The only reason is because the Democrats are in control of Congress right now. They can do these things. So they are going to do it. It has nothing to do with law and order or justice or threats against American democracy. Give me a friggin' break. It wasn't even close to that, right? It was done and over in like 3 hours. They finished counting the votes that same night. So it wasn't the darkest day in America. I can think of many other darker days than this one. Okay, we've got Soul Viking says, I am sure they will be ignoring inconvenient facts or circumstances like accounting for the large number of the unindicted co-conspirators. How convenient. Yeah. They just want to be able to bring this up every time, and they don't want people to forget about it. Feisty Lady says, if Republicans take back the House, can they disband this select committee? That's a good question. I don't know that. I think that's probably something that you would have to refer to the House rules on. Probably not, right? Because I don't think you want that to happen. I would guess that they can't disband that because there are probably rules that prevent sort of the ping pong going back and forth, right? Every time there's a transition of power, you just dissolve the other side's committees. Every time you get control, you just kick everybody else off the boat. You're out of here, right? Sorry. And so you don't want any you want some consistency. So I would guess that they just wouldn't, their rules wouldn't allow for that to happen, but I don't know, right? It's a great question. Want to Know says, isn't this just a scam to try to blame Trump again? Yes. Wait, Pelosi was in charge, so replace her. Only thing Dems can agree on is to go after Trump. Those two aren't Republicans. They're getting primaried by Trump. That was his political promise to them. That's what his whole energy is being used for. Want to Know. It's a lot of good statements there. And I think you're probably right. I think that both of those candidates will see some pretty heavy primaries the next election. We've got Thunder 9 is in the house, says, Rob, the GOP will be allowed to view the video footage, and can they take testimony from the MAGA crowd who witnessed the FBI and Antifa damaging property and inciting violence? It could all backfire on Pelosi. It could, but remember, the GOP is basically useless, right? They haven't done anything, right? The efforts to defend any of this stuff have been totally absent, okay? Their showing at the impeachment trial was pretty weak, I would say. I think they did a fine job, right? They didn't really need to do much because it was kind of a foregone conclusion. We all knew this was a political spectacle that had zero possibility of passing because they just didn't have the votes. So all they wanted to do was waste a bunch of time and sort of, bloviate for themselves to puff up their political profiles, knowing that it was never going to go anywhere. So the Republicans, in order to make something good of this, right, to turn a bad development into a positive, to seize on an opportunity, they would actually have to get their act together. And I don't think that they have any interest in doing that. Okay. Mitch McConnell, McCarthy, any of these mainstream Republicans, they don't want to go defend Trump or the MAGA people. They have no care that they have no interest in that at all. And so you sort of see, we saw this after the election. Donald Trump was sort of scrounging around attorneys. The GOP wasn't fighting for him in almost any of the post-election lawsuits. And everybody just sort of ran the other way because they were satisfied with the result. Nobody liked Trump because Donald Trump was not playing according to the old GOP playbook. And so they were kind of okay that he's gone, right? They're not particularly upset that they're not in power anymore. They know they've got Sleepy Joe and ineffective Kamala up there that are sort of just bumbling through this administration. Have they passed anything meaningful yet? No. Infrastructure is sort of, working its way through. They've passed an ungodly amount of spending, but if the balance of power changes next year, and it's not looking like they're having really any good momentum on the border and infrastructure, Joe Biden came up and screwed that one up. And so, if a president doesn't have a big win in sort of the first 2 years, the balance of power changes, it might be the end of the presidency, which is why Democrats are freaking out right now. This is why they're coming out there and sort of blaming Republicans for the defund the police stuff. And you're seeing the narratives shift. You're seeing the stories come out. Kamala Harris is now having some inner office problems because nobody likes to work with her because nobody likes her in general. So, I don't expect the Republicans to do much of anything because they kind of know that Biden's just probably going to be a lame duck here soon enough. And they don't want Trump to win. So if they rub Trump's noses in the Capitol Hill riots, it's a win for him. For everybody, for them. We've got Nadarb says, if they don't end up finding any new information on the supposed pipe bombs, then we'll know it was a complete setup. Also, isn't it a conflict of interest that the Wicked Witch of the West, aka Nancy Pelosi, since she was one of the people responsible for the lack of a National Guard presence? Yeah. Yes, right? Are they going to ever reveal to us any of their own incompetence here? Right? She is the Speaker of the House. Or at that time, was she the Speaker? I think she was, right? I think she was the Speaker of the House at that time. So they have the House Sergeant at Arms, and they've got all, she's been in charge of a lot of this stuff for 175 years. So presumably she knows, how to handle some of this. And she's out there affirmatively denying additional resources from the National Guard, if that's true. All right. We have Sharon says, one thing we can absolutely count on 100% from this select committee is, quote, no evidence whatsoever of any involvement of the FBI, CIA, DHS, NSA, DEA, all of them, ATF, all of them, any state, local government, law enforcement agency. Yeah. No, they had nothing to do with it. This was all white supremacist, oath keepers, Proud Boys, the racist Proud Boys with the non-white leader named Enrique Tarrio. The whole thing's like a joke. It's like Miss Lucky says, Capitol Defense. Obtain government video by discovery or subpoena. Identify government operatives who were not charged. Establish their actions, physical and verbal. Possible entrapment defense. Change of venue from D.C. So a lot of good questions there. So it's a good it's a good question, right? So the select committee certainly has subpoena power, and I'm not sure really how that's going to work and whether they're going to disclose much or any of this to us. So I'm not sure that we're going to actually get any of that material. So the select committee might get it, but are they going to disclose it to the public? And also, this committee doesn't look like it is actually charging anybody with a crime. Capital defense. Yeah. So we're talking about so this committee is not actually charging anybody with crimes. Now, they might make recommendations about, future criminal policies or how to deal with these in the future. But from my understanding right now, this is just sort of an inquiry. They're just gathering information. They're going to, investigate and subpoena and interrogate and call in for hearings and just generally make this a pain for the Trump side of the country, but not actual criminal charges. So that means that, a defense wouldn't be available like entrapment. You'd have to charge somebody with a crime and they say, no, as an affirmative defense, I was entrapped. And therefore, I think we're talking about two different things. So this is a congressional hearing, so there really would be no need to change venue from DC. So a change of venue would be appropriate if you were trying to sort of rectify a jurisdictional issue. So for example, in the Derek Chauvin case, Derek Chauvin, a change of venue might have been useful for him because he could have gotten a different jury. He could have gotten a different trial environment, something that is more beneficial to him. But in this case, this is just Congress, right? They're just going to be doing all of this in the congressional buildings. They don't need to go anywhere else. They're going to be communicating with other DC officials, so I don't think they need to go anywhere. Good question. We've got Chris Wiseman says, to paraphrase from Rumsfeld, the IRS tax code is the ultimate known unknown. It really is a mess. Good to see you, Chairman. And that's Chris Wiseman. Chris Wiseman's in the house. We got Boxy Punk Chick says, I believe it is a way for Pelosi to hide her name from being at fault for not allowing the police. Yeah, it's sort of like, it's like when you overcompensate for something, It's like if you injure somebody and you're like rush over there and help them and all this stuff, and you sort of kind of oversell it a little bit. They go, did you cause that in the first place? Did you leave that banana peel on the ground there? So it's sort of feels like she's turning this into a bigger thing than it is, maybe for some of those reasons. DK Poor says, have you ever wondered why the Republicans Pelosi is having on the committee will want to commit, quote, political suicide to their career in the RNC in the long run? I do wonder that. Yeah, I mean, I wonder if it's because they see the political tides shifting, if they see the writing on the walls, if they're going to be abandoning ship and going over with the Democrats. I don't know. A lot of good questions. I'd be curious what your thoughts are on that, DK Poor. We'll catch those later, I'm sure. All right, some great questions came over from watchingthewatchers.locals.com. And a quick reminder before we move on that I am a lawyer at the R&R Law Group in Scottsdale, Arizona. We love helping good people facing criminal charges to find safety, clarity, and hope in their cases and in their lives. We can help with all types of cases, things like drug charges, felony charges, DUI charges, traffic violations. We can help clear old mugshots off the internet. We can restore your civil rights so you can vote again, possess a firearm again. We can file motions to set aside anywhere in the state of Arizona. And if you happen to know anybody, we would be very humbled at the opportunity to help. So the phone number there is 480-787-0394. And if you don't need any actual legal services, I'd encourage you to go check out my informational offerings down here at gumroad.com/Robert Gruler, or you can take a picture of that QR code. And the one I would recommend for most people is down here, the Law Enforcement Interaction Training. It is a 2-hour course, 2.5-hour course, about an hour and a half of content and about an hour of questions and answers. But we go through the 1, 2, 3 rule for dealing with the police. It's the one rule, the only rule you need. There are 2 questions that law enforcement officials can ask you that you have to answer. And if they ask you something that is not one of those 2 questions, rule number 3 is you got 3 responses you can use to get yourself out of most situations and protect your rights is really what this is all about. So it is the 1, 2, 3 rule, available over at gumroad.com under Law Enforcement Interaction Training. And of course, thank you so much for your support over there. We really do appreciate it. All right, last segment of the day, we're going to be talking about voting rights. The Supreme Court of the United States just came out with a major ruling on voting rights. Voting restrictions, some people calling it. Maybe this is encouraging voter suppression. I like to think of this as really doubling down on voter integrity. Now, of course, that probably makes me somebody who is well, we'll leave that alone. Let's go into the article here. This came out of an Arizona case, more if you can believe that. Mark Brnovich is our attorney general here, and I've been very critical about the Supreme Court for a long time, specifically relating to their opinions and their activities as it relates to election cases, voting cases. We saw this. We had many cases file a petition for writ of certiorari in front of the Supreme Court. I think it was 16 different attorney generals that had issues with the 2020 election. And the Supreme Court, no, we don't want to deal with that. And they also said, Pennsylvania, your state legislature, whatever you want to do whatever you want. We don't care. You can run your elections however you want to. If you want to make them mail-in ballots, that's fine. If you want to extend the deadline for voting, that's fine. If you want to go harvest ballots, whatever you want to do, as long as you get Trump out of there, go hog wild, go nuts. And I was not happy about that, right? I've said for a long time that the Constitution is pretty clear. The elections are run under the purview of the legislature, the state legislature, and they are the ones who get to set the rules. What we saw in 2020, in my opinion, legally, was a lot of manipulations around those rules. And it wasn't anything that was, this isn't rigged. I'm not trying to say that happened, but the rules absolutely did change. We saw that there was a deadline on one day, and then suddenly it changed 3 days later or 9 days later. And it wasn't the state legislatures that have been delegated the responsibility under our Constitution to do that. It was courts, or it was officials from the executive branch, like we saw down in Georgia and elsewhere in other parts of the country. So the rules were changing all over the place. So, President Biden is the president. He's in the White House. He's sitting there right now. So I'm not going to be making any claims here that anything went wrong with the 2020 election. YouTube will literally just throw you off there for that. So we're not going to go down that road. But in response to 2020, a lot of states have now passed a bunch of new rules. So we're not looking backwards, we're looking forward. In the next election, what can we do about this? A lot of people said, well, whatever happened in 2020, whatever you want to leave that at, was not okay. And we're also sort of seeing that there are a lot of other problems sort of percolating around America relating to voting. In Brooklyn, or in New York City, the race for mayor there, I think they just threw out, or they're having to retabulate the votes because 130,000 extra votes just sort of popped up out of nowhere. The most secure election in history, right? And so states are tired of that. They want to pass some rules. Arizona did that, and the Democrats were not happy about this. So they sued. We have a lot of very powerful organizations on that left side of the aisle with people like Mark Elias and others, Democracy Docket, who are waging wars in the courts to seize an advantage as it relates to voting. So in Arizona, we passed a new law, and we of course had somebody file a lawsuit against us. They did not like the law. They say it's discriminatory. They say that this is violating voting rights. And so there's a lawsuit that happened. It went up to the Ninth Circuit. The Ninth Circuit said, nope, those laws are okay. You can actually keep those. Then there was a rehearing in the Ninth Circuit, and the full court came back and said, no, that's not okay. You can't have those rules. They're too restrictive. They're too discriminatory. They're too much sort of suppressing the vote, and they're disparately impacting certain demographics, right? Certain people of color, persons of color, and this is discriminatory. So we're sort of in a precarious position until today. The Supreme Court came out and said, no, yeah, Arizona, you're free to impose those restrictions. Let's get some background here before we take a look at the syllabus from the opinion. Here, the Supreme Court upholds the restrictions. Over from the New York Post, posted today, Supreme Court upheld in a vote of 6-3. 3 liberal members are joining in dissent. So we have, of course, as we know, the Supreme Court has 9 members. Currently, we have, 5.5 conservative judges, and we have 3 liberal judges. And so today, very ideological split. Some of the prior Supreme Court cases we've covered here have been almost like unanimous. We've talked 4 or 5 different unanimous cases, and we're going, wow, this is crazy. All of the rest of the country is extremely divided politically, but the Supreme Court kind of feels like they're working in unison. Not today. Today was a split. The righties on the right, the lefties on the left. Let's take a look at this decision. It was the court's first consideration of the Voting Rights Act, a part of it that talks about voting rights. So Republican-controlled state legislatures, like here in Arizona, they what they say is they seek to impose restrictive new voting rules. Okay, so you see how the New York Times frames that, right? It's a restriction. So we've talked about this spectrum before, where on the one side, you have sort of the pejorative term of the concept. If you're talking about, let's say, more verification for voting, if you're talking about, making sure people go to their polling place rather than anywhere else, if you don't let people collect ballots and things like that, the left will typically call that voter suppression, right? It's racism, it's voter suppression, blah, blah, blah. The same concept with a positive spin on that is called voter integrity, right? That's what the Republicans call it. So it's the same concept. We're going to sort of put more protections around the voting process. Liberals call it voter suppression. Republicans say, oh no, that's negative. We call it voter integrity, okay? And what the New York Times is doing, of course, is framing it in the pejorative sense. They're saying, oh, it's restrictive new voting rules. Whereas people like me might say, well, what, showing your ID is restrictive? Like, we can't verify who you are? Oh, you have to go to your polling place? Oh, we don't want people harvesting ballots, just sort of gathering them up and doing whatever with them, because that breaks the chain of custody to some degree. So all of those things, to me, feel like voter integrity. We want to know who is voting, when they're voting, where they're voting, and make sure that it's a legitimate vote so that we don't run into these issues again. So the opposite side of that is that, no, it's too disenfranchising. This is something that is precluding people who should be voting from voting. And of course, in America, we all talk about democracy and how important the vote is, and how essential it is to exercising your American freedoms. And now it's supposed to be something that we want everybody to do because it matters, until it kind of doesn't anymore, right? And so we don't want people to not feel like they're participating. And so we want massive voter enfranchisement. So we're always playing this balancing act between what kind of restrictions can we impose that ensure that we have some integrity in our elections versus how do we make sure that the people who should be voting and want to vote can vote without a bunch of speed bumps in the way that make it more difficult for them to do so. So we're having this conversation back and forth. Last election, it was very much about voter enfranchisement. COVID. Grandma can't leave her house. So we're just going to give them whatever you need, vote whenever you want, however you want, vote online, vote 5 times if you want to, nobody cares. Go wild, right? And we saw this. We covered a lot of these cases. I think this is largely why we're demonetized currently, but it is a big issue. And now what's happening is the Supreme Court came out and said, we're going the other direction on this. If the states want to respond to a lot of the insanity that we saw in 2020, they're free to do that. We said that Pennsylvania you can move your rules around however you want to. Arizona, same goes for you. If you guys want to, actually make this more about voter integrity, you're welcome to do that. Let's go back to the article and see what else is happening here. The Arizona decision suggested that the Supreme Court would not be inclined to overturn many of the other state measures. Okay, they're saying that let's see here. Samuel Alito, he wrote for the majority, very good judge, a very conservative judge, said that courts should strike down voting restrictions only when they impose substantial burdens on minority voters that effectively block their ability to vote. Okay, very high standard. Substantial burden that is essentially blocking the vote. Okay, that's a very high standard. Which means that if somebody's like, well, it's a little inconvenient for me to vote at that time based on whatever that restriction is that you're imposing, that's not a valid concern anymore. If somebody wants to come through and say, well, I don't have ID, the state says I got to have ID, I don't have ID because I'm a disenfranchised person of color or whatever, and I'm going to file a lawsuit, the Supreme Court is saying, don't bother. Yeah, don't bother. Go get an ID and go vote, right? It's not blocking your vote, your ability to vote. And that is not a substantial burden, right? I don't know if they're going to rule that way on the ID thing, but that's what we're saying, right? That's the standard. It's got to be, if we're going to overturn and strike down a state's voting restrictions, it better be a big one. And it better be a substantial burden, and it better basically be blocking that community from voting. Anything else? Pretty much fair game. He says, where a state provides multiple ways to vote, any burden imposed on voters who choose one of the options cannot be evaluated with also taking into account the other available means. So you just put in one escape valve, sort of an alternative, and that gives people multiple ways to get there. He says fraud can affect the outcome of a close election. And remember, folks, Justice Alito, if I'm pretty sure, I think he would have actually heard the case from the attorney generals back in the 2020 election. I think he wrote a dissent that says he would have said that they had standing. I could be mistaken on that, though. Fraud can affect the outcome of a close election. He said fraud can also undermine the public confidence in the fairness of the elections and the perceived legitimacy of the announced outcome. Yeah, right, because I think there are still huge swaths of the American public that has questions about this. Now, this is how the judges ruled. This is the breakdown over from the SCOTUS blog. And as we recall, right, this is the split On this side, on the right side, we have the so-called conservative judges. Roberts is questionable, right? I think you could make the argument that the line is kind of here, maybe like a little bit squirrely over here like that. But what you see here, Republicans, conservative judges over here, the left over here, not winning. So the dissent was written by Justice Kagan, and then the majority was written over here by Justice Alito. So pretty obvious split there. In the dissent now, Justice Kagan, she says that wherever it can, the majority, which means the court here, they give a cramped reading to broad language. She says then it uses that reading to uphold 2 election laws in Arizona that discriminate against minority voters. So the New York Times says that the ruling will draw fresh attention to address voting restrictions. The Democrats called for the People Act, but it's stalled. Unless Democrats like Joe Manchin or Kyrsten Sinema want to jump in on this, it's dead because they need 60 votes. Some congressional Democrats are holding out for more legislation. John Lewis, Justice Department, is sort of getting involved in Georgia's new voting law. We didn't talk about that, but that's a big deal. The court today, she says, says a University of California professor, the court today also makes it harder to prove intentional racial discrimination in passing a voting rule, making it much harder for the DOJ to win in its lawsuit against the new Georgia voting law. So the DOJ just got a little bit of a backhand there as well. Thanks for playing. You're not going to be doing that in Georgia. They're allowed to pass these laws. The larger message of the ruling was that the Voting Rights Act of 1965 that was hobbled in 2013 retains only limited power to combat voting restrictions said to disproportionately affect minority voters' access to the polls. Let's see. President Biden said in a statement that the court has now done severe damage to 2 important provisions of the Voting Rights Act, says that after all we have been through to deliver the promise of the nation to all Americans, we should be fully enforcing voting rights laws, not weakening them. He said this decision comes just over a week after the Republicans blocked even a debate, even consideration of the For the People Act that would have protected the right to vote from action by Republican legislators in states across the country. They are so mad about that. They are so mad about that H.R. 1 not passing, the For the People Act. Oh my goodness. Because that would have cemented their power for basically the rest of our lives, right? They would have been able to federalize elections, and the same rules that they sort of maneuvered in order to win the last one, they would be able to permanently effectuate. This is a big ruling. While this broad assault against new voting rights, says Biden, is sadly not unprecedented, it's taking on new forms. It is no longer just about a fight over who gets to vote. So obviously in this nicely prepared statement, he didn't think or say any of that, obviously, because that's actually well written. The new case, Brnovich versus National Committee, concerned 2 kinds of voting restrictions in Arizona. One required officials to discard ballots that were cast at the wrong precinct. So in Arizona, of course, we have different precincts. There was an effort here to create what are called these tabulation centers, which are sort of these big mega conglomerates where all the ballots can come into. And part of the problem with this, we've talked about this previously, is when you want to do an audit on any one particular precinct, if you lump them up into a big bucket, you can't determine what precinct the problem was in. Okay, so let's say we've got 100 different counties in Arizona, and we want to go audit all the 100 counties. We go to each county, we say, show me your bucket of votes, and we audit the vote. Okay, signature, this is a real person, this is not fake. Okay, great. We're going to audit 2% of the total ballots in that county. We're able to see that. Okay, so this Pima County's good. We got Cochise, they're good. We got Coconino, they're good. We got Maricopa, they're good. Now, the problem here is that in some of these counties and some of these precincts, and of course the counties have all the different precincts in them. And so you want to be able to audit those different precincts and sort of, create these chain of custodies that you can monitor the flow of the ballots. Well, what Arizona was doing at this last election is we created these tabulation centers, okay, where you would take, let's say, 50 different precincts, and you would just sort of dump them all into one big bucket. So now when you want to go do an audit, you pull out from the big bucket. You can't distinguish between all the different counties. And so Arizona said, we're not happy with how that went, because we have some questions about some of the votes here, and we don't like that process. So we passed this new this new rule that says if you're going to do that, if you're not going to cast it in your right precinct, your vote doesn't count. There are ways to go cast a legitimate vote. That is not one of them, by just going and dumping it wherever you want. Right? We have precincts for a reason. It's organized a certain way to protect the integrity of the vote. There are many reasons for that. This is not a situation where you just get to write it on a sticky note and fold it into a paper airplane and throw it at your senior citizen working your polling place. Okay, it's not how this works. And so when Arizona then wanted to pass some new laws, Supreme Court came out today and said that that was fine. The other thing said it made it a crime for campaign workers, community activists, and most other people to collect ballots for delivery to polling places, also called ballot harvesting, right? The law made exceptions, though, for family members, caregivers, and election officials. So the problem with that, of course, is you would just send these ballot harvesters to go around to different, communities, and you might pick out a community that happened to be very red, right? You go to this zip code, a bunch of Republicans. Well, we're here to collect your ballots, and we're from the Republican Party or whatever. And go, oh, sure, yeah, yeah, that sounds great. Save me a trip to the poll. You give them that. All of those just make it right into the garbage, right? Because we have people like, Acorn or whomever that are out there trying to game the system. So Arizona said not going to happen. Not interested in that. And the court also agreed. So the larger battle in the case was not whether the particular challenged restrictions should survive. The Biden administration said, for instance, that they told the justices in an unusual letter that the Arizona measures did not violate Section 2, but the letter disavowed Trump's interpretation, which would have limited the availability of the test to lawfulness of all sorts of voting restrictions. So Section 2 bars voting procedures that result in a denial of an abridgment of the right. In the Arizona case, the Democratic National Committee filed the suit in 2016. Last year, the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Ninth Circuit ruled that the Arizona restrictions disproportionately disadvantaged minority voters. Okay, so by passing those two things, by saying no ballot harvesting and by saying you got to vote in your actual precinct, the Democratic National Committee sues, says, nope, that's discriminatory. It's going to disadvantage minority voters. We think that's wrong. And they asked the court to throw that out. 2016, we have Black, Latino, Native American voters were about twice as likely to cast ballots in the wrong precinct as other voters, according to the judge in the Ninth Circuit. He wrote for the majority, right? It was a 7-4 decision. So he goes through and he says, listen, yeah, I mean, we've analyzed the data. The people who are voting in the wrong precincts, they're Blacks, Latinos, and Native Americans. So yeah, it is discriminatory. That judge also comes through. He says that there is no evidence of any fraud in the long history of the third-party ballot collection in Arizona, right? So this is not the election officials. This is the ballot harvesting. So why can't minorities vote in the right precinct? He says there were frequent changes in polling locations. So maybe there's some malfeasance from the evil racist Republican election operators. They say, well, we're just going to, oh, that's a Black zip code. We're just going to move the polling place here. And then the next day move it over here. And then the next day move it over there and then over here. And so nobody knows where to go. So they just drive down and go, oh, that says vote here. They just go and then throw their ballot in there. Right. Other could be confusing the placement of polling locations and high rates of residential mobility. So this would be that people just move a lot and they don't actually update their address, which would with the DMV or the MVD, which would then give them a new polling location. They don't do that. So they should be allowed, according to this judge, to just kind of drop off their ballot wherever. 4 judges in the dissent said that the state's restrictions were commonplace, supported by common sense, and applied neutrally to all voters. The lawmakers were entitled to try to prevent potential fraud, said Judge Diarmuid O'Scanlan, what a name, said given its interest in addressing its valid concerns of voter fraud, Arizona was free to enact the prophylactic measures, even though no evidence of actual voter fraud was before the legislature. Right? So saying that the government has the ability to go out and effectuate these measures. So we have now this back and forth. The Ninth Circuit says those restrictions are great. No problem at all. You're welcome to do that. Then the full Ninth Circuit says, oh, no. There's no history that ballot harvesting is problematic. There's also pretty good evidence that the Ninth Circuit finds that actually minority voters are voting in wrong polling precincts more than white people are. And so it's a disparate impact on them. It's disproportionately harming them. So it goes from Arizona, yep, it's good, to Arizona, nope, it's not good. And then we go up to the Supreme Court. And now the Supreme Court says, yep, totally okay to do that. So this is from the Supreme Court of the U.S. It says here, Brnovich, the Attorney General of Arizona, versus the DNC, the Democratic National Committee. So Brnovich, of course, is a Republican, and being sued by the DNC, they submitted a certiorari to the United States Supreme Court, appealing from the Ninth Circuit, argued March 2nd of this year, decided today, July 1, 2020. Now, this is a syllabus, which means we're not going to read the full opinion. Very, very long opinion. I think even the dissent was like 40 pages. I think that was Kavanaugh. I can't recall. Let's see if it's in here. But anyways, we're going to go through this. This is a syllabus. It's not the full opinion. We're going to kind of read through it quickly because there's a lot here, and I don't want to bore you by just reading everything. But it says, Arizona law generally makes it very easy to vote. Okay. Generally, it's easy to vote. Voters can vote on election day in person. They can they have a voting center in their county of residence. We've got, let's see, early ballot that you can vote by mail in 27 days. They also may vote in person at early voting locations in each county. So right there, you got 4 different options for this. These cases say that under the Voting Rights Act, that Arizona law was essentially violating the Voting Rights Act. It says Arizonans who vote in person on election day in a county that uses the precinct system must vote in the precinct to where they're assigned, right? That's the rule. If a voter votes in the wrong precinct, that vote is not counted. Second, for Arizonans who vote early by mail, it makes the new bill, House Bill 2023, makes it a crime for anybody to harvest the ballot. Okay, except, a voter's caregiver, family, or any of those things. So the Democratic National Committee, they filed suit. They said that the state's refusal to count those ballots in the wrong precinct, those were a restriction. It had an adverse and disparate impact on the state's American Indian, Hispanic, and African American communities in violation of the Voting Rights Act. So the Voting Rights Act, of course, is federal legislation that sort of raises up the standard, the baseline, right? It says, states, yeah, you're kind of free to do what you want, but we're going to make sure that you're at least doing this stuff. Can't discriminate against minority voters. You can't disenfranchise them. And so what they're saying is happening here is that these new laws are lowering the line. They're saying that violates the VRA, the Voting Rights Act. So it goes through the district court, rejected all of the plaintiff's claims, which means that at the lower level district court, the DNC lost, the Democrats lost. But then it went up to the Ninth Circuit. The en banc court, which is the full court, found that the lower level district court committed clear error, and they overturned that. Then it goes up to the Supreme Court. So what does the Supreme Court say? The holding today is Arizona's out of precinct policy and HB 2023 do not violate the Voting Rights Act. HB 2023 was not enacted with a racially discriminatory purpose. Okay? So essentially what this means, the implications are of this, Arizona, you're free to pass these rules. Out of precinct prohibitions, allowed. If you are a ballot harvester in Arizona, you're out of luck. You're out of a job. Go find something else to do that's more useful. There are rules and restrictions that states can put in place that are now going to be acknowledged and upheld by the U.S. Supreme Court. It's a big deal. 2 threshold matters grab the court's attention. First, they say they reject that the petitioner has no Article 3 standing. Okay, we're going to skip over that. The court's statutory interpretation starts with a careful consideration of the text. So standing, we talk a lot about standing, right? So somebody said they don't have standing. Court said, nope, we're going to hear the case, so we can skip over that. The court's statutory interpretation, they say they want to carefully consider the text. So they look at Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act. 1982, Congress amended the language, and they said that it required the burden of proof of discriminatory intent. Okay, so yeah, so this is quite bland, but there is some interesting things sort of happening here. So there was Section 2 that said that there's a standard. Remember we talked about standards earlier in the show about what's sort of the baseline. There's a level of conduct that the government has to prove, or a plaintiff has to prove, or anybody bringing a lawsuit has to prove. Here, the DNC was bringing a lawsuit. And what they're claiming here is that there's a disparate impact, meaning there's a differential between what the white people get and what the non-white people get. And so if we're going to be judging a law, here it would be HB 2023, and saying that this thing is discriminatory, how do we come to that conclusion? How do we analyze that? Go to the law. Section 2 says, well, previously there was sort of this language that said that proof of discriminatory intent required a certain type of language, but now that language says that discriminatory intent is in a manner that results in the denial or the abridgment of that right. Okay, so it's a higher standard, right? In a manner that results in a denial or an abridgment of that right. So Congress amended this. In place of that language, Congress changed it. The phrase went from something different to now discriminatory intent means something that was done in a manner that results in the abridgment of the right, right? The denial or the abridgment to vote on account of race or color. So it's just like what we read in the article. What the judge here is saying is, if you're going to consider this to be a restriction, it actually has to be a restriction. Okay, it cannot be one of these things like ballot harvesting or like going to the right polling place, right? It actually has to sort of prevent somebody from voting. Makes the standard much higher. That means a lot more conduct is going to be able to be prohibited in the voting process, right? Things like IDs and other, signature verification and all of those things. If the states want to respond, the court is going to back them up here. All right. It goes on. It says another important feature is the totality of the circumstances requirement. So they're going to be looking at all the different factors. The court goes through different important circumstances, but does not attempt to compile an exhaustive list. The size of the burden imposed by a challenge is highly relevant. Voting necessarily requires some effort and compliance with some rules. Thus, the concept of a voting system that is, quote, equally open and that furnishes equal opportunity to cast the ballot must tolerate, quote, the usual burdens of voting, right? Mere inconvenience is insufficient. We're sorry that it's inconvenient for you to show your ID, but we got to make sure you are who you are. Otherwise, we might have illegitimate elections. Okay, that's kind of what that is saying. It's a mere inconvenience to go get those things. Now, the response to that is always, no, it's not, right? There are certain people in certain environments, in certain situations where they don't actually have an ID, which is, I think, borderline racist in many concepts. There was that man on the street video, I think, on YouTube, where there's some YouTuber who's going around, he's going up to black people in cities saying, this person said that you don't have an ID and you don't know how to vote. Do you have an ID? And they say, what kind of insane question is that? Yes, I'm an adult person in society. Yes, I have an ID, right? And he's being ridiculous about it because it's a ridiculous thing. But Joe Biden says that, certain minorities don't have access to the internet. And what else did he say? Oh, they're afraid they're going to get deported if they don't get the vaccine. So we got racist Joe up there now. All right. So, these things are mere inconveniences. We have to make sure that we protect the integrity of our voting systems. The degree to which, all right, let's go on to the next slide. It says here, they're also considering some other factors like the strength of the state's interests. So does the state of Arizona have a strong, legitimate state interest in preventing election fraud? Of course they do, right? So they've got a strong interest in making sure that they're governing the integrity of their elections. Some factors identified in a different case. We've got more totality of the circumstances stuff. So let's just carry on here. We've got the racial disparity portion of this. So let's see what they say here. Next, the racial disparity in burdens that are allegedly caused by the out-of-precinct policy is small in absolute terms. All right, let's see the analysis here. He says, of the Arizona counties that reported out-of-precinct ballots in 2016, a little over 1% of Hispanic voters, 1% of African-American voters, and 1% of Native American voters who voted on election day cast an out-of-precinct ballot. For non-minority voters, white people, the rate was around 0.5%. So a 0.5% difference. A procedure that appears to work for 98% or more of the voters to whom it applies, minority and non-minority alike, is unlikely to render a system unequally open. Okay, so because about 2% of the people can't figure out how to vote, does that mean that we can't pass any voting restrictions? No, the court says no, you're welcome to do that. Okay, it works for 98% of the people. Those other 2%, sorry, figure it out next time. Appropriate weight must be given to the important state interest furthered by precinct-based voting. It helps to distribute voters more evenly among polling places. It can put polling places closer to voter residents. It can help each voter receives a ballot that lists only the candidate and the public questions in their precinct, right? It's been a long pedigree in the U.S. Policy is widespread. We do this everywhere. So stop complaining about it. Court of Appeals, they did what they did. Let's wrap this up. It says reversed and remanded. We have Alito, who wrote the opinion, joined off on by Chief Justice Roberts, Thomas Gorsuch, Thomas and Gorsuch, Kavanaugh and Barrett. So those are the 6-3 judges. Gorsuch filed a concurring opinion in which Thomas joined, which means that there's a separate opinion here that also has some things that we can take out of it. And then Kagan, Breyer, and Sotomayor, they all filed dissenting opinions as we talked about previously. So there was another point that I needed to make or wanted to make about the concurring opinion. Oh, I think it was this. I think it was that Gorsuch wrote the concurring opinion and Thomas joined that opinion. Now, what Gorsuch was saying, I think, was that there was a question about standing here. Okay, whether the DNC, we talked a lot about standing, whether the DNC had standing to bring the lawsuit in the first place, right? So if Gorsuch and the Supreme Court say that some of these entities don't have a claim to bring a lawsuit because they don't have standing. Remember, we talked all about standing. We're not going to beat that up again here. But in other words, the concept is that you don't have the ability to bring a claim into court in the first place because the harm doesn't impact you. So the DNC here, they may be saying that, well, we're going to file these lawsuits on behalf of all of these voters. And the court might say, yeah, but just like when all these people wanted to file lawsuits on behalf of Trump, we said that there was no standing there because they weren't harmed. So if the DNC is not ultimately being harmed by this, because they're not the voters, right? They're an organization. Gorsuch is saying, well, maybe they don't have standing either, which might wipe out all of these sort of, overly active, litigious wings of the parties, both parties. The big one, of course, being Mark Elias and Democracy Docket. Right? They filed lawsuits all over the country. We've covered most of them, and they were moving things around legally. So if the court now is sort of hinting that maybe they don't have standing, maybe they lose a lot of their power. They can file all the lawsuits they want. The court just dismisses them and says, nope, sorry. So this might actually have some serious consequences down the line. And Mark Brnovich, the person who actually brought the suit, he posted on Twitter, very happy about this. He says that SCOTUS rules in favor of Arizona's election integrity protections in Brnovich versus DC. I'm thankful the justices upheld the state's ability to pass and maintain common sense election laws at a time when our country needs it most. So he sent he linked over to the opinion. Mark Brnovich over on Twitter. I listened to Mark Brnovich at a campaign speech one time. And he said something that was pretty funny. He says, I'm so fiscally conservative that I don't even buy the vowel right there between the R and the N. Brnovich, right? He's missing a vowel. Or I'm sorry, maybe between the B and the R, maybe that's what he's referencing. Like a B-U-R or a B-E-R or whatever. Brnovich. So fiscally conservative, I don't even buy the vowel. It's a good line. I don't know if he is fiscally conservative or not, but big win on that one. Big win on that one. That's for Arizona. That's for the country. Voter integrity, it's back in vogue in the Supreme Court. That's good stuff. We've got questions coming in hot from watchingthewatchers.locals.com, queued up and ready to go. Look at this. We got ZZ, the boxing cat, is here, says, it's absolutely insane that not all people want secure and transparent elections. Well, yeah, it is insane, but they want something more than that, something that benefits them better. It's called power. And they want that badly. We've got Jeremy Matrita says, if the state legislature has the sole authority to decide how elections are conducted, who then would have standing to be able to bring suit? So I think that's sort of up in the air. I was sort of commenting on that by Gorsuch's concurring opinion. So it sounds like right now, currently, the rule is that the DNC was allowed to bring the lawsuit, right? They brought it, Supreme Court accepted it, heard it, everything. So currently the DNC can sue, or you could have, any other entity sort of sue to stop these things. The Supreme Court at this moment has not said that they don't have standing, but Gorsuch is sort of hinting towards that direction. So that maybe, further down the line, we get a different situation, a different case where they sort of are revisiting the same standing issues that we had a lot of grief about during the Trump election litigation. Maybe they sort of flip that and they stop they're nipping it further down the line. Okay, so let's back this up. So the Supreme Court during Trump's election litigation, they said you don't have any standing because he was sort of filing claims after the fact, right? The election had already happened. He was filing looking backwards. What's happening here is they were filing to stop the new law from going into effect in the first place. So it's a different issue. And so the standing for them filing that new lawsuit thus far has been held, right? it was found that they did have it. That's why the case made its way up to the Supreme Court, whereas Trump's didn't. They said he did not have standing. But Gorsuch is hinting that maybe this is an issue that is worth revisiting. And so now the concept might be that the court has already found that standing doesn't exist in post-look-back type of cases. Trump lost, look back, nope, no standing to challenge certain things or certain people filing lawsuits on his behalf don't have standing. And so now maybe they're starting further down the line. They're saying even the people who are sort of filing these claims in the first place, like the Mark Eliases, the democracy dockets that are suing all the different election directors, people like Kathy Bukvar from Pennsylvania, maybe they don't even have standing in the first place to bring the lawsuits to begin with, which would change a lot because they manipulated the rules to serve their party. Could be a big deal. Sharon Quidney says, I wonder what would happen in states without voter integrity laws, like blue states, if conservative voters were to engage in what you might call massive anti-voter suppression activities, aka erection frogs. Yeah, I don't know. Wonder if they could manage to change anything. Could be interesting to see how many votes the population is exceeded. Yeah, so Sharon's. So we're not endorsing any voter fraud here or erection frogs either. No erection frogs, but it's a good question, right? And we sort of were joking about this, that if both sides are allowed to cheat, if the courts just say, do whatever you want, then both sides are just going to out-cheat each other, right? The Republicans are, I would venture to guess, if they were marginally competent, they would say those Democrats, they did a pretty good job with whatever that looked like. We're going to take a play from their playbook, and we're going to try to effectuate it this next election. And so you just have, one-upping each other. And then you have like the state of Arizona with, 8 million people that has 12 million votes. You go, that's strange. But this just happened in New York City. So it's not too far out of the ordinary, is it? We got Want to Know says, doesn't Constitution citizens shall vote? Don't most citizens have ID? Yes, they do. Like go to work? Yes, they do. Rules legally required, like Social Security numbers? Yep. How does anyone have a job without an ID? Maybe they're paid in cash. I don't know. Or a bank account? Yeah, I think banks want them. IRS wants you to have an ID. Police want you to have an ID. How do you live without an ID? I don't know. How do you get out of jail without an ID? Seems the government wants you to have ID everywhere, but not to elect the most powerful person in the world. You don't? Huh. So good. That was such a good comment. Thank you for that. Want to know. But not to elect the most powerful person in the world. You don't? Huh. Yeah, you're exact. Yeah, it's curious. It's weird. I don't know why you need it for all that other stuff, but not for that. I don't know. Maybe our elections, they can just sort of sense it. They can just sense who you are. All right. Jeremy Matrita says, logically speaking, the right to vote is specifically granted to a real person who meets certain criteria. Therefore, it is reasonable to expect one to be validated that they indeed meet the criteria. Right. Rights are meaningless if they can't be validated. Yeah. So yes, you want a functional voting system. We saw what happens when it doesn't work all that well. Makes perfectly reasonable sense to me that we know who is participating in the election. I don't know what's so complicated about that. But ZZ the Boxing Cat says, I don't know why it always comes down to race with the Democrats. There's poor people, old people, handicapped people of all races and creeds that have hardships. Yeah, it's true. It is true, right? What about people who are born with, physical disabilities or something like that, or mental incapacities? Okay, right? There's a whole different category of people, but they don't ever talk about that. They kind of just talk about race. Wonder why. Soul Viking says, I have not yet read the text, but hopefully there is explicit, abundantly clear definitions, for example, of caregiver. Nursing home operators typically have been called caregivers in the past in other capacities, but this cannot stand. Think Pennsylvania. Yeah, I don't know. I haven't read it either. I'd be curious to see how specific that is and whether, that person. Well, look, I mean, candidly, right? I think that this still sort of solves the problem, because I think the caregiver relationship you're right. It's not a one-to-one relationship, because nursing home operators might be a general caregiver for, like, let's say a group of people, right? And so one caregiver maybe just becomes a caregiver for the entire floor of senior citizens, and something happens to their ballots, right? Unless the caregiver is a one-to-one relationship. Okay, I'm a disabled senior person and I have a caregiver, so that caregiver is entitled to take my ballot because I'm incapacitated, right? Something like that would make sense, but not a caregiver that serves the entire floor that just says, oh, okay, well, I'm in a nursing home. We got 400 people here. I'm just going to go collect all the ballots, and I happen to know everybody's political ideologies, so this will be fun, right? I agree with you. I think it's worth looking at the text, but we'll see. Want to Know says, wasn't mail-in voting for bedridden people originally? Military rules are completely different. Din's always trying to confuse the two. Yeah, so there were a lot of different rationales for mail-in voting and why people, we've covered a lot of this when we talked voting. I think we were talking about a case in Michigan that, no, I think it was Wisconsin. I think it was a Wisconsin case. But basically the court, the legislature said, we don't want mail-in voting. Like, we don't want it at all. We think it's problematic, and it can be problematic, right? Because in a polling place, you have a physical presence. You can physically see who it is. We call this in law chain of custody. Think about evidence that is being seized from, let's say somebody suspects that you've got drugs in your car. Well, you got to make sure that whoever takes those drugs documents it, seals it, impounds it properly into evidence and all of those things. Because if one officer just throws it in his trunk and then he, takes it out a couple of weeks later and throws it in the evidence locker, and you don't really know who had it, where it came from, whether somebody manipulated it, whether somebody went in there and modified the drugs or spiked them or, did something to that. So we always are checking the chain of custody. Where did the evidence come from? Who gave it to A? Rob gave it to Ryan. Ryan gave it to Paul. Paul gave it to Mark. Mark gave it to John. And we all just sort of work our way and connect the dots from one person to another. And mail-in voting just doesn't really foster that. So states have said specifically, we don't want it at all. But when COVID came around, the court said, well, you have to have it now. You gotta allow them to do that. You got to move these dates around, and you got to make it so people can just go online and request the ballot, and all these rules that then, Zuckerberg and other people spent $400 million in specific districts to then sort of, create a tide that was going one direction, and we all saw what happened there. Sharon Quidney says, unfortunately, this ruling, welcome as it might be, is a case of trying to close the barn doors after the horse decamped with several bags of Trump votes. Yeah, right. Yeah, so I agree with you, Sharon. Hey, thanks. That's great. It's good. Nice ruling there, Supreme Court. Would have been good if you did that a couple years ago, but they didn't do that. We've got last one up from the feisty lady here. Says, I read the whole Alito opinion, and mixed in all that text seems to be a statement made more than once towards keeping the federal government out of the state right to run elections as they see fit. Yeah. And so I think you're right. I think Alito is more of that mindset. I've read many of his opinions, and he is somebody who I think is more in alignment with the federalism concept. Okay. So like Alito and Gorsuch, they're, let me say Alito and Thomas, certainly they're sort of more on that end of the spectrum. Whereas I think that Roberts, Barrett, and Kavanaugh, they're sort of more of that, like the Federalist Society, sort of the neocon wing of judicial philosophy. So I think Alito certainly is more in alignment with federalism. Feds do what the feds do, states do what the states do, and we don't like the commingling of those different rights and responsibilities. And that's a meaty opinion to read there, feisty lady. My goodness, that's a big one. Good for you. All right. Well, those were great questions. Those all came in from watchingthewatchers.locals.com. I appreciate all of your support there. And those were great questions. I've got some actual homework to do. Thank you, Sharon Quidney, for that. So before we get out of here, quick reminder, I'm a lawyer here at the R&R Law Group. We've got an amazing team of people here. We can help with felonies, drug charges, traffic violations, DUIs, and anything and everything in between. So if you happen to know anybody in the state of Arizona that needs some help with a criminal violation, we would love the opportunity to help. We offer free case evaluations. We've got all sorts of financial options that we can work with, and we love what we do. We would be really humbled if we just had the opportunity to help. So our phone number is 480-787-0394, and the QR code there, if you want to take a picture, will take you right on over to our website where you can schedule online. All right. And if you don't need legal services, that's all right. You can get some education if you're kind of looking for something to do. Want to invite you to try out my law enforcement interaction training program, 2.5 hours, where you learn the 1, 2, 3 rule for dealing with law enforcement. And you can check that out at gumroad.com/Robert Gruler. It's a nice app because you can sort of listen to this stuff on an app on your phone. Take it with you to the gym, take it with you in the car, wherever you want to go. You can just kind of listen in on some of this good stuff. Existence Systems is over here. And if you're a lawyer or a legal professional, definitely check out the mastermind group that we have. We meet twice monthly. A lot of good stuff. Also, thank you to our new supporters who just signed up over at Locals. And I want to welcome all of you. Thank you for joining us and helping us to build a separate independent platform, one brick at a time. Every one of these, one brick at a time. We got CLC 292 is here. Welcome to CLC. We got that one Florida man. Oh my goodness. this is outstanding. That one Florida man, he's officially here. I've been making fun of him for like 9 months, and here he is. Good to see you, that one Florida man. Welcome. We are forever grateful for your presence. We have at Murphy24. Welcome, Murphy. We have Ryu Jin is now in the house. Welcome to you, Ryu Jin. We got Crazy Neutrino also joined up. Welcome to you, Crazy Neutrino. And we have at Dove65. We got some new people in the house, and a big welcome. Thank you all seriously so much for your support. It really does mean the world. As you know, YouTube is not really, happy with us. And so the fact that we're able to kind of do some other interesting things like having these monthly meetups and doing law enforcement interaction training and just sharing links and communicating, it really is a lot of fun. I'm sincerely enjoying getting to know you and learning from you. I've got some stuff I gotta do today. We've got great questions, as we already talked about, from everybody. Here on the screen, you know who you are. If you have not gone over to Locals yet, you can get all this good stuff when you go over there. Free copy of my book. It's called Beginning to Winning. You can download a PDF if you're a member at Locals. Otherwise, you can buy it on Amazon. There is a PDF of all the slides we went through today that you can download. You can download my impeachment party document. You can also download my existence system, personal productivity template. We share links throughout the day. There's a lot of great people over there. And our next Zoom meetup is on Saturday, July 24th, 2021, 7 p.m. Eastern time. If you're a member at watchingthewatchers.locals.com, then you will get the registration link as soon as it is posted. And it's a lot of fun. We've done 2 of these now. We had, at the last one, we had some amazing people on there. We had somebody from the Czech Republic that was asking us about our opinions on policing here. And so we sort of, it's an international community, my friends. It's amazing. This is global. It's a worldwide movement. I want you to be a part of it at watchingthewatchers.locals.com. All right, my friends, and that is it from me for the day. I want to thank you so much for being here. We're going to be back here, same place, same time tomorrow. It's Friday tomorrow. Hey, look at that. So that's going to be fun, and I want to make sure that you're here and a part of the show at that time. So that's it for me. We're going to wrap up and leave it here. I will see you all here tomorrow. Same place, same time, same location, 4 p.m. Arizona time, 5 p.m. Mountain, 6 p.m. Central, 7 p.m. for that one Florida man who's now in our community. Everybody else, also have a tremendous evening. Sleep well, eat well. I'll see you right back here tomorrow. Bye-bye.